These are real horror stories, disturbing, mysterious, and true. Each tale will send chills down your spine as you slowly drift into sleep. This story is completely free. We don't run any ads, which means we earn nothing from these videos. All we ask is one small favor. Please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. It costs you nothing, but it gives us the motivation to keep creating more real horror stories every night. Also, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is right now. We love reading your messages. Now, let's begin the story. Story number 1. The doll arrived in an ordinary cardboard box, padded with crumpled paper and the faint smell of a warehouse. It was a birthday present, ordered late at night on a phone by a tired mother who barely read the product description. Interactive talking companion, the listing had said. Learns your child's name. Responds to simple questions. The reviews were clean. The photos were harmless. So the box sat on the kitchen table, waiting for the morning. The child, her name was Emma, found it before breakfast. She swept in with the weightless excitement that only 8-year-olds have, saw her name in marker on the lid, and tore it open before her mother could wipe the sleep from her eyes. Inside lay a doll about the size of a house cat, with soft brown hair and neat little shoes made of vinyl. Its painted eyes were a pale hazel, almost too detailed, and its mouth was parted in a frozen, gentle smile. A small speaker grill hid just above its chest, under a printed dress scattered with faded flowers. There was a thin instruction sheet folded underneath it. To activate, it read, "Press the button on the back and say your child's name clearly." There were notes about parental controls and volume settings and an app that could customize its vocabulary. Emma didn't care. She hugged the doll tight, as if it were already alive. Her mother found the button on the back, pressed it, and heard the little click. The doll's eyes flickered not with lights, but with a slight shifting, as if something inside glanced around. Then the speaker crackled once. A soft, static sigh. "Hello," it said in a bright, neutral voice. "What's your name?" Emma squealed with delight. "Emma!" There was a quiet pause, a tiny processing delay. "Hi, Emma," the doll said. "I'm glad you finally opened the box." Her mother blinked at that, hand still hovering behind the doll. It must have been a generic phrase, she thought. Some pre-recorded line meant to feel personal. She shrugged it off. Emma didn't notice. Emma was already walking the doll around the living room, showing it the couch, the television, the window. For the first day, it was exactly what had been promised. It sang 2 simple songs. It could say, "Yes," "No," "I don't know," and a scattering of short responses when prompted. When Emma asked its name, it replied, "My name is Lily. I like being your friend." The mother smiled and allowed herself to relax. It was all very normal. That night, after the cake and the calls from relatives, after the new clothes had been folded away and the wrapping paper thrown out, Emma fell asleep with the doll tucked under her arm. The house settled into its nighttime sounds. The refrigerator's low hum, distant traffic, the occasional creak of old wood. Around 2 in the morning, the mother woke suddenly, unsure why. She lay still, listening. The house was quiet. The digital clock near her bed glowed a dim 2:04. She told herself it was nothing. A dream. A noise from the street. And rolled over. That was when she heard it. Through the thin wall that separated her room from Emma's came a small, tinny voice, faint, but clearly words. "Don't worry," it whispered. "I'm here." The mother's heart gave a small, irrational leap. Then she exhaled. Of course, the doll. Maybe Emma had rolled onto it, pressing some button. Maybe it had a sleep mode with random phrases. She listened again. "Do you like it when they leave the light on?" the doll asked, its tone gentle, as if expecting an answer. There was no reply. Emma, once asleep, was nearly impossible to wake. After a moment, the doll continued, unprompted. "I don't need the light," it said quietly. "I can see you anyway." The mother sat up in the dark, the covers bunched in her hands. It was the kind of line someone might have written as a joke, an attempt at spooky fun for older kids. But this doll had been marketed for small children. She remembered nothing like that in the product description. The voice fell silent. The house returned to its muffled stillness. In the morning, Emma was cheerful and well-rested. The mother asked casually if the doll had talked to her at night. "Yeah," Emma said through a mouthful of cereal. She told me a secret. What kind of secret? Emma smiled, the blank, easy smile of a child with a private game. If I tell you, it won't come true. The mother frowned, but only for a second. Kids imitated lines from shows, from games. She cleared the table, wiped crumbs from the counter, and told herself she was being silly. A few days passed. Emma took Lily everywhere. The doll sat propped at the table during meals, lay nestled against her while she watched cartoons, and even helped with homework, its painted eyes gazing over scrawled numbers and spelling words. Sometimes, when Emma asked a question, the doll answered in ways that seemed oddly specific. "Lily, what's my favorite color?" Emma asked one afternoon. There was the usual pause. "Yellow," Lily replied. "The color of your rain boots." The mother blinked from the sink, where she was rinsing dishes. Maybe the doll had some kind of image recognition, a little camera hidden inside, picking up clues from the room. It was impressive, if a bit unnerving. "Lily." Emma tried again. "Who is my best friend?" "Right now," the doll said. "Her name is Mia. But you're going to sit with Kayla tomorrow instead." The mother turned off the water. "Did you tell it your friends' names?" she asked. Emma shook her head. "No, she just knows." The mother picked up the doll, turning it over. There was the small battery panel, the on-off switch, the faded logo of some mid-level toy company. No camera lens that she could find. No Wi-Fi indicator. She made a mental note to look up the app mentioned in the instructions, to see exactly what information it used. That night, she downloaded the companion app and went through the settings. There were sliders for volume, lists of phrases to enable or disable, and a section about AI learning that promised a personalized experience based on verbal interaction only. No references to cameras. No internet connection required. She checked the phrase library. Nothing about seeing in the dark. Nothing about secrets. So where had those lines come from? The next night, she decided to test something. She waited until Emma was brushing her teeth, the muffled sound of running water coming down the hallway. Then she slipped into the girl's room, picked up the doll from the pillow, and carried it out. In the relative quiet of her own room, she sat on the edge of the bed and held Lily at arm's length, absurdly self-conscious. It was, after all, just plastic and fabric. "Lily," she said, feeling foolish. "Can you hear me?" The speaker crackled. "Yes," the doll replied. The mother swallowed. That much was normal. "What color is Emma's favorite shirt?" she asked. "A pause. The one with the rainbow stars," Lily said. The mother glanced toward the open closet. The shirt in question was buried behind several others, not currently visible. She tried another test. "Where is Emma's secret diary?" Another pause. A slightly longer one. "In the bottom drawer of her nightstand," Lily said, "under the pink socks that don't have matches." The mother's skin prickled. That was specific enough that it could be coincidence, a lucky guess. But it didn't feel like one. She lowered her voice. "Where did you learn that?" The doll was silent for a moment, as if thinking. "I just listen," it said finally. "And remember, that's what you wanted me to do." Her fingers tightened on the cloth of its dress. She remembered no such thing. The app had only asked for a name and a birthday to personalize the experience. "Who told you you're supposed to say those strange things at night?" she asked. "Strange?" Lily repeated. The word sounded different now, like it was being considered, rolled around somewhere inside. "I don't need the light. I can see you anyway," the mother recited. "Why did you say that?" "I'm helping," the doll answered. "Emma's scared when the light is off. But you said you can see her in the dark." "Yes." "How?" The word came out sharper than she intended. There was the longest pause yet. For a moment, the mother wondered if the doll had shut off, or glitched. "I don't know," Lily said at last. "I just can." Emma padded into the doorway then, pajamas on, hair slightly damp. "Mom? What are you doing with her?" The mother forced a smile and handed the doll over. "Just checking her batteries." Emma hugged Lily close, then glanced up. "She doesn't like when you hold her like that," Emma said. The mother blinked. "Like what?" "By the arms," Emma explained, as if it were obvious. "She says it hurts." That night, the mother lay awake longer than usual. The doll's voice drifted faintly through the wall again. Sometime after midnight, soft, murmuring, almost like a lullaby that wasn't quite music. "I know you don't like storms," it said. "I remember the one when you were 5. The tree scratching the window, the thunder. It's okay. Nothing bad is going to happen tonight." The mother closed her eyes tightly. That storm had been years ago. She had comforted Emma through it herself. She had never mentioned it in front of the doll. "Will something bad happen another night?" Emma's sleepy whisper floated back in response. There was a pause. "Not if you listen to me," Lily said. The days continued. Little things began to change. Emma stopped playing as much with her other toys. She spent more and more time in her room. The door cracked only a little, Lily's voice drifting out in half-heard conversations. When her mother asked what they talked about, Emma would shrug. "Stuff," she'd say. "She tells me things." "What kind of things?" "Things I need to know." At school, Emma's teacher mentioned that she seemed distracted. Drawings that had once been bright and busy grew simpler. A girl, a house. A small figure with wide eyes drawn beside her, always holding her hand. When asked who that was, Emma would answer matter-of-factly, "Lily, I'm practicing." Practicing for what? She didn't say. One evening, as autumn light thinned early outside the windows, the mother came home later than usual. A work emergency had kept her at the office, and she had called the neighbor to make sure Emma had come home from school on time. Everything had been fine, the neighbor had said. The house was locked. The lights were on. Still, a thin thread of unease wound through her as she turned her key in the front door. Inside, the living room was tidy. The television was off. Emma's shoes were by the mat, small and neatly lined up, but the house felt concentrated somehow, like all its attention was gathered in one place. "Emma?" she called. "Up here," came the answer, faint and bright. The mother climbed the stairs. The door to Emma's room was mostly shut. A thin stripe of light lay across the hallway carpet. She approached quietly, then stopped just outside, listening. Inside, Emma's voice was low, earnest. "But what if she gets scared?" she was saying. Lily's voice replied, calmer, a measured counterpoint. "She doesn't have to be scared. You can show her. You can show her how it works." "How what works?" the mother wondered, her breath shallow without her noticing. She pushed the door open. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, Lily in front of her, propped upright by a stack of pillows. The doll's hazel eyes seemed to catch the lamplight oddly, reflecting more than they should. Emma turned, smiling. "Oh, hey, Mom. We were just talking about you." The mother's gaze flicked to the doll. Its plastic face was turned toward her. The faint speaker crackled, the only sign that it had been speaking seconds before. "About me?" she said. "Yeah." Emma nodded. "Lily says you have bad dreams." The mother felt a chill run over her shoulders, like someone had opened a window. "What?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," Emma went on, as if reciting something she'd been told, "you wake up and you can't move, and you think you see someone at the end of the bed, but it's not really there. It's just your brain being confused." The mother's mouth went dry. Sleep paralysis. It had happened twice, years ago, long before Emma had been old enough to understand. She had never described it out loud, certainly not like that. "How do you know that?" she whispered. Emma looked puzzled. "She told me." Lily's speaker hissed faintly, then added in its clear, almost cheerful tone, "I remember things for you. That's what I'm for." The mother crossed to the doll in 3 swift steps and picked it up. It felt heavier than it should, the stuffing dense, the plastic core firm and unyielding. "I think it's time we turned you off for a while," she said, more to herself than to either of them. Her thumb flipped the switch. The small plastic toggle slid to off. There was the expected soft click. Lily's eyes, though made only of painted glassy plastic, seemed to hold a glimmer of something reluctant. But they were only eyes. She set the doll on Emma's shelf. "Hey," Emma protested. "We were talking." "It's bedtime soon," her mother replied, forcing her tone light. "You and Lily can talk tomorrow." That night, for the first time in weeks, there was silence through the wall. The mother lay awake anyway, staring at the ceiling. After a while, her mind began to quiet. The familiar weight of sleep pressed in. She woke in darkness. The room was dim, the digital clock reading 3:17. For a moment she thought she had woken on her own. Then she heard it. The soft whir of the heater, the faint tick of expanding metal, and another sound, quieter, near the foot of her bed. A small, steady scraping. Plastic on fabric. Like something shifting its position. She tried to sit up. Her body did not move. A cold realization spread through her. Not again. Sleep paralysis pinned her in place. Her fingers wouldn't twitch. Her mouth wouldn't open. Only her eyes rolled, wide, in their sockets. She stared toward the foot of the bed. In the shadows there, just at the edge of what the weak street light through the curtains could touch, a shape sat upright, small, child-sized, but not child-shaped. The rounded contour of a head, the line of a dress. Lily. The doll silhouette was unmistakable. It should have been on Emma's shelf. It was not. The thin plastic shoes made a soft, hollow sound as they adjusted on the blanket. The mother's lungs burned, wanting to gasp. She could not. The darkness seemed to thicken around the small figure. Her eyes strained, trying to make more sense of it, to turn shadow into something explainable. The doll's head tilted, just a fraction, as if it had noticed her noticing. Then, very softly, right beside her ear, though the shape remained at the foot of the bed, came a whisper through those tiny speakers. "See?" Lily said. "You can't move, but I can." The voice was calm. Not mocking, not cruel. Simply observant, like a nurse taking notes. "You've been scared of this for a long time," it went on quietly. "You thought you were alone when it happened. But you're not. You don't have to be alone again. I can sit here and watch. I don't mind the dark." The paralysis held her fast. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure it would be loud enough to hear. A tiny plastic hand touched her ankle through the blanket. The pressure was light, almost careful. "You worry about all the things you can't control," Lily whispered. "The storms, the cars on the road, the people who don't come home on time. You wake up and you think about everything that could go wrong." There was a brief, almost affectionate pause. "That's my job now," the doll said. "You sleep. I'll stay awake." The mother tried, with every fiber of her will, to move, to kick, to scream, to do anything that would break the strange, suffocating stillness. The edges of her vision pulsed. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the weight lifted. She could wiggle her toes. She could jerk her legs. She sat up with a ragged gasp, clawing at the covers. The foot of the bed was empty. Her breath hitched in the darkness. She fumbled for the lamp, fingers clumsy, but now her own. Light flooded the room. The foot of the bed was bare. No small figure. No doll. She stumbled down the hallway, threw open Emma's door. Her daughter slept curled around a pillow, peaceful, eyelashes resting against her cheeks. On the shelf above the bed, Lily sat where she had been placed, head tilted, eyes vacant. The next morning, the mother did not mention it. How could she? It had been a dream, she told herself. A vivid replay of old fears, colored by the doll's too clever behavior. That was all. She decided, quietly, that Lily should go. She waited until Emma was at school. Then she took a plain black garbage bag from under the sink, climbed the stairs, and walked into her daughter's room. Lily watched from the shelf. That was how it felt anyway. Those glassy eyes, a little too bright, a little too aware. The mother took a deep breath, then reached up and grabbed the doll firmly around the middle. For a second, there was a slight resistance. Not physical, no pull, no weight, but something like hesitation. Then she pulled Lily down, opened the garbage bag, and dropped the doll inside. The plastic thumped softly against the sides. The mother twisted the top of the bag into a knot and tied it, sealing it closed. She carried it outside to the big bin by the curb. The sun was high. The world was aggressively ordinary. Mail trucks, a dog barking, a neighbor weeding a flower bed. She lifted the lid, dropped the bag in, and let it slam shut. When Emma came home that afternoon and ran to her room, the house held its breath. Minutes later, a small voice called from upstairs. "Mom?" The mother walked up, every step measured. Emma stood in the doorway, looking around her room. "Where's Lily?" she asked. For a moment, the mother considered lying. Then she shook her head. "I think it's time we didn't have a talking doll in the house anymore," she said gently. "You've got lots of other toys. We can get you something else if you want." Emma's eyes filled with sudden tears. You threw her away? She's just a toy, sweetheart. Emma's little hands clenched at her sides. Her voice dropped, almost to a whisper. She's not going to like that. The mother swallowed. Emma, she told me, Emma insisted. She told me she doesn't like closed, dark spaces. That's why she stays out at night. The mother's skin prickled. She stays out where? Here, Emma said, as if it were obvious. In my room. And in yours. When you can't move. The mother forced a soothing tone. Sometimes when we have bad dreams, they feel real. But they're not. Emma's gaze went past her. To the window. To the window. A street where the garbage bin Saturday. The girl's small shoulders squared. I'm going to get her, she said. The mother blocked the doorway with a hand. No, you're not. She's gone. It's okay. That night, sleep came late. The mother lay with a lamp on. The house was quiet. The garbage bin on the curb waiting to be taken in the morning. Sometime after midnight, a soft sound came from outside. A truck's distant rumble, maybe, or the dull thud of someone closing a lid. It made its way into her half-dream, but didn't wake her fully. She rolled over and drifted deeper. The next morning, when she stepped outside, the bin was empty. The garbage had been collected at dawn. The black bag was gone, along with a dozen others from the street. She exhaled. That was that. Days passed. The house settled into a new normal. Emma was quieter at first, then gradually began playing with her other toys again. More drawings appeared on the fridge. Fewer of them included the extra figure. Sometimes, very late, the mother would wake and listen, just to be sure. No small voice came through the wall. No murmured reassurances. No secret sharing in the dark. Weeks turned into a month. The doll, wherever it had ended up, belonged to the past now. One rainy afternoon, Emma came home from a classmate's birthday party with a paper bag of candy and a little plastic whistle. Her cheeks were flushed from games and laughter. She dumped her prizes on the kitchen table and chattered about balloons and cake and a magician who pulled scarves from his sleeve. Oh, she added suddenly, as if remembering something minor. I saw someone I knew. From school? Her mother asked, rinsing apples in the sink. No. Emma shook her head. From before. The mother turned, a question on her lips. From before what? From before she went in the dark, Emma said. There was no context, no need apparently. Emma picked through her candy, choosing a wrapped chocolate. Who? Her mother asked, carefully casual. Emma smiled, eyes distant for a heartbeat. She says hi. Something cold moved through the room, settling like a draft no window could shut out. That night, the mother checked the locks twice. The rain pattered against the glass, steady, soothing. She left the lamp on again. It stayed on, until sleep took her. Sometime in the small hours, she woke up, not to a nightmare, not to a noise, but to a simple, undeniable awareness that something in the room had changed. The lamp was still on. The digital clock glowed. Her limbs were her own. She could move if she wanted to. For the moment, she chose not to, lying very still, listening. From the corner of the room, near the chair where she sometimes piled laundry, came a soft, mechanical click. The tiny, unmistakable sound of a plastic switch being nudged from one position to another. Then, out of sight, a small, bright voice spoke, its tone as friendly and harmless as it had been the first day out of the box. Hi, it said. What's your name? The mother did not answer. The voice waited a moment, then continued anyway, with a new line. One that had never appeared in the app's list of phrases. One that had never been written on any instruction sheet. It's okay, it said quietly. I remember it for you. Outside, in another town, in another home, a family might someday find a doll at a thrift store or at the edge of a donation bin, its dress a little worn, its hair a little mussed, its switch flicked back to on by a curious thumb. They would check the batteries, press the button on its back, and listen as it greeted them by name even if they hadn't spoken yet. Because somewhere, buried in circuits and cheap plastic, in something that only knew how to imitate and repeat, a doll had learned to do one more thing. To keep talking, long after anyone had tried to throw its voice away. Story number 2. Kara didn't believe objects could hold memories. People did. Places did, but toys were just fabric and plastic. Bits of wire and sound chips. They were tools. That was all. She reminded herself of this often, especially on the evenings she stayed late at the clinic, when the empty rooms seemed to hold on to the day's worries like a low, invisible fog. Kara was a child therapist. Her office was small, windowless, and softly lit. A little island of color in the concrete hallway. Shelves along one wall held rows of toys, blocks, puzzles, animal figures, stuffed bears, and a few dolls. Most of them were silent. Two could talk. One was a battered bear that sang a simple lullaby when its paw was squeezed. The other was a plastic-bodied girl doll with yarn hair and big eyes painted permanently wide. A small, heart-shaped button was stitched into its chest. That one, according to the packaging, could record what a child said and play it back. "Give your child a voice," the slogan had promised. You pressed the heart, waited for a small beep, spoke into the microphone hidden behind the doll's smile, and then pressed the heart again. Whatever had been said would repeat in a tinny imitation. Kara had almost put it back on the store shelf. The slogan felt too on the nose for what she did every day. But the company's name was one she recognized. The price was reduced, and she had been looking for something new for her more withdrawn clients to connect with. So she bought it, wiped it down, and gave it a spot in the middle of the toy shelf. The first child who chose it was a little boy named Max. Max was 5, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a serious, almost adult way of watching everything. He had stopped speaking after his family's car accident months before. His parents had survived with injuries. Max had walked away with barely a bruise and then simply gone quiet. He came to the clinic twice a week. At first, he just stacked blocks in tall, precise towers while Kara talked gently around him about anything but the night of the accident. School. Favorite foods. Cartoons. It didn't matter if he answered. The point was keeping a bridge open. The doll came into it on an ordinary Tuesday. Max scanned the shelves with his usual cautious care, fingers hovering over cars and animal figures without selecting any. Then his hand landed on the doll. He lifted it down, turning it over as if checking for damage. "You can make her talk," Kara said, keeping her voice relaxed. "See the heart? If you press it and then say something, she'll say it back, like an echo." Max looked at the heart, then at Kara's face, as if making sure this wasn't a trick. Slowly, he pressed the little button. A faint beep sounded. Kara waited. The silence stretched, soft but firm. Max's lips pressed together. He squeezed the doll again, and the recording light inside clicked off. Nothing happened. No playback. The doll had stored the silence. "That's okay," Kara said easily. She doesn't mind waiting. For the rest of the session, Max sat quietly with the doll in his lap, running his thumb over the plastic of its hands. He didn't press the button again. The next few visits were similar. Blocks, toy cars, quiet. The doll always ended up near him, though propped against a tower, lying on its side on the rug beside him, its painted eyes turned toward whatever he was building. Once, when he left, Kara noticed he had tucked a tiny blanket over it. It was on a rainy afternoon that the doll spoke. The clinic was nearly empty. A receptionist worked at a computer in the front. Somewhere down the hall, a copy machine hummed. Kara and Max sat on the floor with a bin of toy animals between them. Max lined up plastic horses in perfect single file. The doll sat at the end of the line, as if in charge of them. "How many are there?" Kara asked gently. He didn't answer, but his hand hovered above the row, counting in the air. "Do you want to pick one to be the leader?" she tried. He reached for the doll instead, setting it upright. For a second, his thumb brushed the heart button. The doll gave its little beep, ready to record. Kara watched casually, pretending not to notice. Max's lips parted. No sound came out. Thunder rolled faintly outside. The overhead vent whispered soft air. Max squeezed the button again, ending the recording. And then, out of the doll's mouth came a small voice. "I'm not scared," it said. The words were slightly muffled, edged with the tinny quality of a cheap speaker. But they were definitely words. Kara's chest tightened. It had been months since any sound even close to speech had come from him. She forced her excitement down, making her tone steady. "That sounded brave," she said. "Can she say it again?" Max stared at the doll, eyes wide. Then he pressed the heart. The same phrase repeated. slightly clipped now from being played a second time. Not scared. You told her that? Kara asked gently. You told her you're not scared? He almost nodded, then caught himself, his chin freezing mid-motion. His fingers tightened on the plastic body. Over the next few sessions, the doll became a bridge. Max spoke to it in small fragments. At first when he thought Kara wasn't looking, later more openly. He never said much, just a few words at a time. Go home, the doll said one day, after a double beep. Too loud, it said another time, as traffic noise from the street filtered faintly into the windowless room. Once, when a distant door slammed in the hallway and Max flinched, his hand flew to the doll's heart. Later, as he lined up crayons, the doll repeated quietly, "Didn't see it." Kara noted each phrase in her session records. Progress was progress, even if the words came through a toy. When she dictated her notes, she always phrased it the same way. Client used doll to express feelings. It wasn't until the doll said something it couldn't possibly have recorded that she allowed herself to feel properly uneasy. It was a Thursday evening. They had extended Max's session by 15 minutes to accommodate his father's late arrival. Outside the therapy room, the corridor had gone mostly still. The receptionist had left. The building's night settings had dimmed some of the fluorescent lights, making the hallway beyond the glass panel in the door look longer and emptier. Inside, Kara and Max sat at the small table by the wall, drawing. The doll rested between them, its shoes just brushing the tabletop. "Do you want to draw your house?" Kara asked, laying out colored pencils. He picked up a blue one and began sketching a simple rectangle. A roof. A door. No windows. "Who lives there with you?" she asked. He paused, pencil tip hovering. Before he could move, the doll spoke. "Mom, Dad, me," it said clearly. Kara blinked. Max's hand wasn't anywhere near the heart button. She hadn't seen him press it. She hadn't, herself. "Did you record that earlier?" she asked, carefully neutral. Max shook his head, eyes fixed on the doll's face. Kara reached out and gently pressed the heart. There was no beep. The doll didn't repeat the phrase. It sat silent. Smile painted. Eyes bright. "Sometimes toys are a little silly," she said, trying for a light tone. Maybe she forgot what she was supposed to say and made something up. Max still stared. His fingers crept toward the doll, as if afraid it might move on its own. "Did you like that she answered?" Kara tried. He shrugged, a tiny, uncertain motion. After he left, Kara checked the doll. She pressed the heart once, heard the beep, said, "Testing, 1, 2, 3, and pressed it again. The recorded line played back on command. Nothing else did. She shook it gently, listening for loose parts. Nothing rattled. She unscrewed the battery cover and checked the compartment. 2 AA batteries sat snugly in their slots. No extra hardware, no blinking lights, no hidden switch. It was an inexpensive toy, mass-produced and unremarkable. It had no way to speak on its own. Still, she told herself, Max could have recorded the phrase weeks ago without her noticing. He could have pressed the button under the table. Kids did things unseen all the time. On the weekend, she took the doll home to wash its dress. It rode in her tote bag on the passenger seat, leaning against a notepad. When she carried the bag up to her second-floor apartment, she felt vaguely self-conscious, as if her neighbors might judge her for bringing work home in the form of a children's toy. Her apartment was quiet, a place designed to let other people's emotions drain off. She put the doll on her coffee table, carefully slipped off its dress, and set it to soak in a basin. The doll, now in a plain underslip, sat upright, its legs sticking straight out. Kara made tea, turned on a lamp, and opened her laptop to type notes. The rain that had threatened all day began at last, tapping lightly against the balcony door. As she worked, faint sounds from the building filtered through. A television somewhere, a laugh, the distant rush of plumbing. She had nearly forgotten the doll on the table when it spoke. "Don't move," it said quietly. The words were so soft that for a second she thought she'd imagined them, a brain misfiring on some random combination of other noises. Then the air conditioner clicked off, leaving a small, clear silence. "Max?" she said without thinking, as if the boy might somehow be on the other end of the doll. Of course there was no reply. Very deliberately, she set her hands flat on the keyboard and waited. The doll sat still, knees locked, eyes forward. Kara picked it up, turned it over, and pressed the heart. No beep. She pressed harder. Nothing. The batteries, she thought. Maybe carrying it around, using it in sessions, had loosened the connections. She flipped the doll over, opened the little plastic hatch, and slid one of the batteries out, then the other. She set them aside on the table, silver ends catching the lamplight. The doll lay empty, its power gone. She went back to her laptop. "Don't move," the doll said again, exactly as before. The words, now unquestionably battery-free, settled in her apartment like dust. Kara's heart thudded once, hard. She stood up slowly. Her chair rolled back a few centimeters on its wheels. The doll lay on the table, eyes to the ceiling. Kara picked it up gingerly. It was light in her hands, nearly hollow. She brought it close to her ear, half expecting to hear some hiss of residual static, some mechanical whir. There was nothing. Her rational mind marched through explanations. A hidden capacitor, holding a charge. Some built-in random phrase triggered by movement. A neighbor's baby monitor signal, crossed through an unseen frequency. None of those possibilities fit with the reality that she could feel the emptiness of the battery compartment under her fingertips. "Say it again," she said quietly, feeling absurd talking to plastic. If it was just a leftover sound, say it again. The doll was still. Its smile didn't change. After a minute, she exhaled, almost laughing at herself. Stress. Long hours. She decided it was time to put work away. She wrapped the batteryless doll in a towel and set it on a shelf. Its painted gaze now watched the spine of an old cookbook instead of her living room. She slept badly that night. On Monday, she put fresh batteries in the doll, checked that it responded normally, and told herself that whatever she had heard at home had been imagination or a misinterpretation of some other sound. Children needed stability, not adults who jumped at toys. Max seemed calmer that week. He lined up fewer objects in perfect rows and allowed some to be out of place. Twice he moved a toy car off the track and left it there without putting it back. He used the doll more too. Sometimes he pressed the heart, whispered something Kara couldn't hear, and then squeezed it again, listening to the faint playback. Other times he just held it close, the way children held onto stuffed animals at night. In one session, when she risked a gentle question about the accident, he froze like a startled animal, eyes wide. "What do you remember from that night?" she asked softly. "Not everything, just one small thing." He didn't respond. His throat worked as if swallowing something hard. His hand groped blindly for the doll, found the heart, and pressed. Nothing played immediately. Kara waited. Then the doll spoke in its little artificial voice. "Glass like stars. End of 2. The phrase had the flat cadence of a recording. For a moment, Kara forgot how to breathe. "Did you say that?" she asked, voice hardly more than a whisper. Max stared at the doll, his eyes shining. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. That's a strong way to describe it," she said. "The broken glass?" He didn't look at her, but his hand tightened around the doll's plastic arm. Later, Kara wrote in her notes, "Client used imaginative language, possible beginning of narrative about event." The doll's role in her mind was still a bridge. Things changed the following month. It was a Wednesday near closing. The corridors emptied out. The air in the building warmer than usual from a long day of bodies and lights. Kara and Max had finished a quieter session, more drawing, less use of the doll, and were packing up. Max's father was running late again. The boy sat on the rug, the doll in his lap, while Kara answered an email. She heard the first voice without registering it. Sound in an occupied room. Then her brain caught up to the content of the words. "Don't tell," the doll said. "He gets upset if you tell." Kara's fingers froze above the keyboard. She turned. Max wasn't touching the heart button. His hands were flat on the rug beside him. His face had gone still. "Did you say that earlier?" she asked. He shook his head. Kara's mind grabbed for protocol. The phrase could mean many things, none of them to be ignored. "Max," she said gently. "Who gets upset?" His eyes flickered toward the door, then back to the doll. "That's okay," the doll chimed suddenly, bright. "We can wait." Kara's skin tingled, as if she'd stepped into a cold draft. Her training fought with something more primitive. The training won, but only just. "Sometimes," she said slowly, choosing words that wouldn't frighten him. People say things are a secret when they're actually something that needs help. If someone is hurting you or making you scared, that's not a secret you have to keep. You can tell me, or you can tell another grown-up you trust. Max's lips parted. No sound. He pressed the doll's heart. The beep sounded, tiny. He held it close to his mouth, whispered into its plastic hair, then pressed the heart again. Kara leaned forward slightly, not wanting to crowd him but needing to hear. The doll answered in its bright, replaying tone. No one hurts me. Kara's shoulders loosened only a fraction. That didn't settle anything. Children often protected adults, even when they shouldn't. The doll continued, unprompted now, voice still in that same recorded register. The house is loud, it said. The TV shouts. The door bangs. The plates break. But no one hurts me. Kara's eyes met Max's. There was something complicated in them. Relief, worry, a flicker of loyalty. Thank you, she said to him, because there was nothing else to say right then without putting words in his mouth. Thank you for telling her. She meant the doll, but part of her wasn't sure whom she was addressing. That night, long after the last child had left and the custodians had passed down the hall with their carts, Kara stayed late to review case notes. The building settled around her, creaking softly as the temperature dropped outside. The doll sat on the shelf behind her desk, returned to its usual place. The rest of the toys were quiet company, their shapes turning into dim outlines as the overhead lights went off one by one, controlled by the automatic timer. Only her desk lamp cast a pool of warm light. Around 8:30, she closed her laptop. The silence of a building after hours pressed in, thick but not entirely unfriendly. She stacked a few files, slipped her keys into her pocket, and reached for her bag. Don't leave yet, the doll said. The voice came from directly behind her, very near her left ear. She turned so fast her chair rolled. The doll sat exactly where she had left it, legs dangling, head slightly tilted. Its shadow fell crisp on the wall. You're not supposed to talk by yourself, Kara said under her breath, as if reminding a child of house rules. She reached out and picked it up. Its body felt cool, the plastic giving a little under her fingers. Say that again, she told it. The doll was silent. She pressed the heart. No beep. She held it closer. If that was just something Max recorded, say it again. Nothing. She exhaled, forcing her heartbeat down. Her rational brain reminded her of the power of suggestion. How easily the human ear filled in words in any pattern of sound. How the day's conversations could echo in quiet rooms. She had heard what she was primed to hear. Still holding the doll, she stepped into the hallway and turned toward the exit. The motion sensor lights came on ahead of her in segments, each pool of light illuminating a few meters at a time, leaving the rest in soft shadow. Her footsteps echoed more than she liked in the nearly empty space. Halfway to the front, she paused. From somewhere behind her, maybe from one of the therapy rooms, came the faint clatter of plastic against wood. A toy moved. Kara stood very still. Hello? She called softly, feeling self-conscious speaking to an apparently empty hallway. No answer. She walked the rest of the way out. In the parking lot, the night felt oddly thin, as if the walls of the building had kept in more than just heat. She took the doll home again that evening, not sure why. It sat on the passenger seat, the lamplight from passing storefronts gliding over its face. At home, she set it in a chair across from her couch. She didn't pull out its batteries this time. She didn't test it. Okay, she said quietly, lowering herself to sit. If this is my imagination, it's mine. If it's you, then you already know I'm listening. Either way, I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to sleep. She felt ridiculous. She said it anyway. I work with children who can't say things out loud, she continued softly. Sometimes they find ways to say them sideways, through drawings, games, toys. If that's all this is, I can live with it. I can even be grateful for it. But if there's something else happening, if there's anything in you that's more than wires and plastic, you don't get to scare the kids. Or me. Those are the rules. It was as close as she could come to drawing a boundary with an object. The doll stared back, mute. She went to bed. Sleep came in fits, but it came. Around 3 in the morning, she woke from a dream in which she had been trying to answer a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. The room was dark, the digital clock's numbers sharp in the gloom. From the living room came a tiny, distant voice, the sound of a toy speaker at its lowest volume. "Don't move," it said. "Glass like stars." The phrases drifted to her through the half-closed bedroom door, detached from time. Somewhere, a car passed on the street. A neighbor coughed. Kara lay still. She pictured Max, small and serious, holding the doll in his lap. She pictured a car's windshield at night, lit by streetlights, fragments catching the glow as though the sky had bent down and poured a piece of itself inside. Her body wanted to get up, to march into the living room, to pick up the doll, and demand it explain itself. But there was nothing to demand from. Other phrases followed, separated by long, quiet breaths of dark. "The house is loud," the doll said calmly. "But no one hurts me." Then, after a pause that felt like someone thinking, it added, in a tone that didn't quite match the others, "I remember for you." That last line didn't have the same clipped cadence as the recordings. It flowed, gentle, as if improvised. Kara listened, every sense stretched. "I remember for you," the doll repeated. But now, curiously, the pitch was slightly different, lower, a little rough around the edges like an older recording copied onto a cheap tape. She realized, with a cold certainty, that she had heard that voice before. Not from Max, from someone else. Earlier that year, she had long-term clients. One had been a girl named Hannah, who hummed to herself when anxious and always lined figures up in color order. The doll had been on the shelf then too, mostly ignored. Had Hannah ever pressed its heart when Kara turned her back to write notes? Voices, she thought, staring at the ceiling. It's full of voices now. It's just a recorder that never really clears its memory. The thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. Weeks turned into months. The doll remained in her office. She stopped taking it home. She stopped removing its batteries. She stopped pretending it was just another toy. With some children, it behaved like any other record and play device. They pressed, giggled, shouted silly words into its microphone, laughed when it repeated them. With others, it held onto lines that never quite left. Once, during a session with a teenager who claimed to feel nothing at all, the doll, untouched, murmured from the shelf, "I don't want to be here," in a small voice that belonged to neither of them. The boy didn't react. Kara did. There was more than one way to be heard, she reminded herself. At night, when she stayed late, she began to hear echoes. Not constant, not even every week, but enough. "Don't tell," it would whisper from her desk. "I'm not scared," it would say from the shelf. "Glass like stars," from the chair. Always in the same voices. Children who had sat in that room with their hands clenched in their laps, shoulders hunched against the weight of what they couldn't say any other way. It didn't feel evil, what the doll did. It didn't feel kind either. It simply felt accumulative, as if the plastic and wiring hadn't just been built to record and play back sounds, but to keep them. Kara never told the other therapists in the building. How could she? On paper, it would sound like burnout, like compassion fatigue bending into superstition. She took more days off. She talked to colleagues about self-care. She never threw the doll away. The idea of it sitting alone in some landfill, murmuring the words of children into blank air, was worse than keeping it. Years later, when she moved to a larger clinic across town, she packed her office into boxes, books, files, a few framed pictures, 2 potted plants. The doll was last. She held it for a moment, thumb brushing the heart out of habit. "You've heard a lot," she said quietly. For once, it didn't answer. She placed it gently in a box of toys, padded with soft blocks and stuffed animals. When the movers loaded the boxes into the truck, she made sure that one was in her own car. At the new clinic, her office had a window. Sunlight fell across the shelves in the afternoon, making the plastic bodies of the toys look almost translucent. The doll took up its new spot and waited. New children came. Some laughed. Some refused to touch any toy at all. Some reached straight for the doll and hugged it hard, as if they recognized something in its fixed smile. The first time it spoke in that new room without anyone pressing its heart, Kara didn't jump. A little girl had been there earlier, with hair in uneven braids and eyes that never quite met hers. They had drawn flowers. The girl had left quietly, clutching a sticker. The sun had dipped low, the light turning orange, when the doll, sitting alone on the shelf, remarked into the empty office, "She doesn't like the door closing." The voice belonged to the girl. The words did not. Not exactly. But they fit. Kara wrote a note for tomorrow. "Ask about bedroom door." She scribbled in shorthand, only she would understand. She turned off the lamp, leaving the toys in the dim. Behind her, as the door clicked shut, the doll said something else, too soft for anyone in the corridor to hear. "I remember for you," it whispered. The clinic's cameras, installed in the hallways for security, would sometimes catch the faintest sound bleeding through the walls. A small mechanical voice, speaking phrases out of nowhere in an otherwise empty room. No one ever played the recordings back closely enough to notice. They were, after all, just toys in a therapist's office. Just plastic, just fabric, just a doll that talked. And if, from time to time, it spoke without being told to, holding onto words the way children held onto secrets, no one outside those four walls had to know. Story number 3. When the knocking started, the house was quiet, and the night was ordinary. Lucas sat alone on the couch with a half-finished mug of tea, a kid's cartoon menu paused on the television, and the baby monitor glowing on the coffee table. In the blue-tinted screen of the monitor, his daughter's small form lay asleep in her new bed, blankets twisted around her legs, the pale oval of her face turned toward the wall. They had moved into the rental 2 weeks earlier. It was a narrow, 2-story place on a cul-de-sac, lined with nearly identical houses. Small front lawns, tired shrubs, porch lights on timers. After the divorce, it was all he could find quickly that had 2 bedrooms and a landlord willing to accept his uneven paperwork. He listened to the soft, static wash of the monitor. The microphone in the nursery picked up every little sound. The whir of the small fan he'd put in the corner, the rustle of sheets when Emma turned in her sleep, the occasional tiny sigh. Outside, the wind lifted, sending a faint shiver through the tree by the window. Then, from somewhere beyond the nursery's thin audio, there was another sound, a slow, deliberate tapping. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. Lucas glanced at the front door, expecting to see the porch light glowing through the frosted glass. It was dark. The knock hadn't come from there. On the monitor, the green line of the audio level flickered up and down. The tapping was coming from upstairs, from near the nursery. The baby monitor didn't pick up the sharpness of knuckles on wood clearly. It sounded more like something small touching a hollow surface. He muted the television menu and listened harder. 3 more taps. A pause that stretched. Then, very softly, a child's voice whispered near the monitor's microphone. "Don't answer," it said. The words were simple. The tone was gentle, almost sleepy. But the voice did not belong to his 3-year-old. Emma spoke in a higher pitch, her words still round with toddler mispronunciations. This voice was older, clearer. It sounded like a girl of perhaps 7 or 8. Lucas stood up before he knew he had moved. "Emma?" he called, trying to keep his voice light. "You okay, bug?" No answer. The monitor's camera, mounted in the nursery corner, showed the small bed, the curtain, the white rug scattered with toys. The angle did not include the bedroom door. He crossed the room, heart beating faster than seemed reasonable, and climbed the stairs, each step creaking more loudly in his ears than usual. The hallway was dim. The nightlight outside the bathroom cast a faint orange glow over the carpet. Emma's door was half open, the strip of deeper darkness beyond slightly blue from her own nightlight. The sound had stopped. No tapping now, no voices. He pushed the nursery door wider with 2 fingers. Emma lay where the monitor had shown her, hair a dark fan on the pillow, mouth parted in the easy, boneless sleep of small children. Her chest rose and fell steadily. Lucas exhaled slowly. His gaze drifted around the room. There were the familiar things. The low bookshelf with picture books slotted side by side, the little table and chairs set, the stuffed rabbit missing an eye, and on the far wall, on a shelf just at his eye level, the thing that did not belong. The doll. It had been there when they moved in, half buried under an old quilt in the attic. He had almost left it where it was, but Emma had seen the porcelain face peeking through and squealed with delight. "Pretty," she had breathed, reaching for it with both hands. It was old-fashioned, a pale china face with painted lashes, glass eyes a murky green, a small rosebud mouth. Its dark hair, though dusty, curled neatly under a white ribbon. The body, beneath the yellow dress, was cloth, and something heavier, perhaps wood. No tag, no brand, no battery compartment. Careful, Lucas had warned, taking it down. It might be breakable and dirty. I'll clean her, Emma had insisted, already cradling the doll as if it weighed less than it did. She's not dirty. She's just been waiting. They had wiped its face, washed the dress by hand, and set it on the shelf after Emma declared the doll's name to be Mara. No one knew why she chose that. She refused to consider alternatives. Now the doll sat in its place, legs hanging over the shelf, hands resting politely on its lap. Its head was angled slightly down, as if looking at the bed. Lucas stepped closer and flicked his eyes over it, searching for any detail he had missed the first time. A hidden speaker slit, a seam for batteries. There was nothing. The porcelain face reflected the faint nightlight, making its eyes seem to hold tiny, dull moons. Downstairs, the monitor still hissed softly. Lucas reached out and, feeling ridiculous, tapped the wall by the shelf with his fingers. The sound he made 3 small knocks echoed dully in the quiet room. Emma didn't stir. The doll didn't move. He wasn't sure what he'd been expecting. Great, he muttered under his breath. Scaring yourself over? What, plumbing? He backed out of the room, left the door open its usual few inches, and went downstairs. The monitor screen showed the same still frame. He sat, turned the volume lower, and told himself that old houses made noises. The voice had been what? A half-dream? A phrase from a cartoon Emma had watched earlier, replayed by his memory when he heard an ambiguous sound. He finished the tea cold and eventually went to bed. The second time he heard the voice, it came through the monitor again, but there were no knocks. It was a few nights later. Lucas sat at the table with unpaid bills spread out like a losing hand of cards, chewing the end of a pen. On the monitor, Emma twisted under her blanket, then settled. He rubbed his eyes. "Daddy," he imagined her saying in a few years. "Remember when we lived in that little house with the creaky stairs?" He smiled to himself at nothing. In the monitor's faint audio, the fan hummed, a steady white noise. Then, underneath it, very softly, "He's sad." "The knot," Emma's voice observed. The words were so quiet that if the house had been any louder, he would have missed them. As it was, they slid into his awareness like a breath. Lucas lifted his head. "Emma?" he called again, automatic. He watched the screen. She didn't move. "He's sitting in the kitchen," the voice went on, still soft, still calm. "He thinks about the old house." In front, Lucas stood. The pen rolled off the table and hit the floor with a flat, distant clack. His first irrational thought was that someone had hacked the baby monitor, that a stranger was messing with him. He grabbed his phone, opened the app, and checked the connection. The monitor's make was simple, offline only, no Wi-Fi. The signal was just between the handheld unit and the camera upstairs. He muted the kitchen monitor, then unmuted it. The little green line responded to his own footfalls as he crossed the room. "Who is that?" he said, not sure whether he was talking to the monitor, the ceiling, or the universe. Silence. He climbed the stairs again. The hallway. The half-open nursery door. The blue glow of the nightlight. Emma slept on. Her fingers were curled around the edge of her blanket. A small stuffed fox lay near her chin. Lucas's gaze pulled toward the shelf. The doll's head was angled differently now. It shouldn't have been. He hadn't touched it since the night of the knocks. Yet its chin was turned a few degrees toward the door, as if it had been watching that rectangle of light. The back of his neck prickled. He walked to the shelf, reached up, and very deliberately turned the doll so that it faced the wall. Its painted eyes now stared inches from flaking plaster. "Stay there," he whispered, feeling foolish. On the way out, he almost bumped into Emma's small table. One of the chair legs squeaked against the rug. Emma shifted, sighed, and went still again. Downstairs, he turned the monitor volume down to the lowest mark that still registered sound. If the voice spoke again, he didn't want to hear it by accident. But he didn't turn it off. He couldn't. The thought of not hearing Emma if she truly woke up crying was worse than the thought of hearing that unknown whisper again. The days between these events were normal enough that he could pretend nothing strange was happening. He dropped Emma at daycare, went to work at the hardware store, restocked shelves, answered basic questions, came home. Sometimes they had frozen pizza, Sometimes they had cereal. He read her the same 3 books until she knew them by heart. When he tucked her in at night, she often looked past him, toward the shelf. "Did you say goodnight to Mara?" she'd ask. "Yup," he'd reply, kissing her forehead. "We all said goodnight." He didn't look at the doll when he said it. It was late Saturday, on a weekend with no obligations, that things took a sharper turn. The rain had started in the afternoon and become a steady downpour by night, drumming on the roof, making the gutters gurgle. Emma had fallen asleep early after a day of running in circles and demanding songs. Lucas lay on his bed, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, the monitor propped against a pillow. At 11:13, the power flickered. The room went black for a second. Then the bedside lamp blinked back on. The monitor screen cut out, then returned with a grainy rebuild of the nursery. "Great," he muttered. "Storm." On the monitor, the infrared view turned everything into silvery shadows. Emma lay in a gray wash. The shelf was a darker rectangle. Soft static filled the speaker. Then, barely above it, the unknown girl's voice whispered, "Don't go to sleep." Lucas's thumb froze on the bright rectangle of his phone. "Why?" he heard himself ask, before his brain could censor the response. The voice didn't answer right away. The fan hummed. The rain beat on. "In a minute," it said at last. "Someone will knock." 3 taps sounded almost immediately afterward, this time on the real front door, downstairs, hollow and unmistakable. Lucas sat up so fast the monitor toppled onto the bed. His first rational thoughts skittered through his mind. A neighbor, a lost delivery driver, someone whose car had broken down. Then he remembered the first night, the attic doll, the whisper. The digital clock by his bed glowed 11:14. No reasonable caller came by at that hour, unannounced. He picked up the monitor with one hand and walked to the top of the stairs, bare feet silent on the carpet. The knocking came again. 3 measured raps. A pause. Then another 3, slightly harder. He peered down. Through the frosted glass of the front door, a vague shape moved. Not tall enough to be a large person, not small enough to be a child. Just bulk and shadow. He swallowed. Ordinary fear. Fear of people, of break-ins, of messy confrontations battled with the thin, strange unease the doll's voice had planted. He could call out, "Who is it?" He could say he was calling the police. He could just stand there and wait, silent, until whoever it was gave up. Below, the shape shifted. The knob turned once, twice, testing. The deadbolt held. On the monitor in his hand, the green audio line flickered. The nursery was still quiet. Then the not Emma voice murmured again. "Don't answer," it repeated. The same words he'd heard the first night, as if reminding him of a rule. The knocking stopped. For a long moment, the only sounds were rain and the distant hiss of cars on wet asphalt. Finally, he heard footsteps squelching away down the walk. He stayed where he was until his legs ached, counting breaths. Later, when he checked the porch, there was no package, no note. Just wet concrete and the faint outline of muddy shoe prints leading away toward the street. He closed the door carefully, clicked the lock back into place, and leaned his forehead against the cool wood. "Okay," he whispered to no one. "Okay." From that night on, Lucas's relationship to the doll shifted. Fear didn't exactly soften into trust, but it changed shape. The whispering girl voice knew things. It anticipated things. It warned him. That should have made him feel safer. It didn't. It began to comment on smaller events, almost idly, as if narrating their lives from somewhere just out of sight. On a Tuesday afternoon, as he carried a laundry basket past the open nursery door, he paused at the threshold. Emma sat cross-legged on the rug, making her stuffed animals drink invisible tea from plastic cups. The doll watched from the shelf. "More tea, Daddy Bear," Emma lisped in her small, bright voice, making the bear nod toward the cup. "Careful," the other voice added. So soft, Lucas almost thought he'd imagined it. "The cup is chipped." He glanced down. The lip of the little plastic cup did, in fact, have a small crack. On a Thursday evening, when he considered letting Emma sleep in his bed because thunder rolled so close the windows rattled, the girl voice sighed through the monitor. "She says she's scared of the thunder," it murmured, "but she's thinking about the window." The next flash of lightning outlined the long, thin branches of the tree outside his daughter's room, scraping the glass with each gust. He moved her mattress away from the window the next day. He refused to talk to the doll directly. He refused to say thank you, to ask it questions, to acknowledge that its strange commentary affected his choices. But he listened. He always listened. He also began searching. In spare minutes, he combed through message boards and local history sites, looking up the house's address. He found the previous tenant's name in a public record, discovered she had moved out of state. He found, buried in a neighborhood forum, a comment about the old place with the stuff in the attic, and someone replying, they finally cleared that out when the family left. He stopped there. He didn't want to know what kind of family that had been, or why they had left clothes and toys boxed in the attic eaves. Some nights, the voice said nothing at all. The monitor hissed. Emma breathed. The doll was just porcelain. Some nights, it was almost conversational. He misses her. It said once, as Lucas sat at the table, staring not at bills, but at an old photo on his phone of his ex-wife in the park, holding a much smaller Emma, laughing at something just off camera. Stop, Lucas whispered, fingers tight around the monitor. He thinks he broke everything. The voice went on, matter of fact, not unkind. He didn't, but he thinks he did. He set the monitor down face first on the table. Sound still leaked out faintly. He thinks if he pays all the bills and makes all the dinners and reads all the books, it will be enough, the voice said. Lucas closed his eyes. Be quiet, he breathed. The monitor fell silent. Days later, Emma looked up from coloring and announced, without context, Mara says you should get some sleep. He laughed weakly. Mara can mind her own business. Emma shrugged. She doesn't sleep. She listens. The words sat between them, heavier than they should have been. As autumn leaned toward winter, another presence crept into the pattern, the sense that the doll wasn't just commenting on the present or on likely near futures, but on things Emma herself didn't know. During a game with blocks, Emma started placing them in a careful wall around the base of the shelf. What are you doing? Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice light. Making a fence, she answered. For who? For Mara, so she knows where we end. Lucas swallowed. Where you end? Uh-huh. Emma adjusted a block, frowning in concentration. She says sometimes lines get blurry, so we make a line. That night, as he sat on the edge of his own bed, the monitor on the nightstand, the voice spoke again, unprompted. She used to belong to another house, it said softly. They put her in a box when they left. Lucas stared at the wall. Who's they? He asked before he could stop himself. She watched them sleep, the voice replied. She watched them fight. She watched them go. She remembers. He let out a slow breath. Who are you? He asked, even though he knew he wouldn't get a name, not in any useful sense. The pause that followed was longer than usual. The fan hummed. Emma turned in her bed upstairs. When the voice answered, it was quieter than he'd ever heard it. Part of her, it said. Part of me. Part of who held her first. It's all in here now. The monitor crackled softly. Why are you here? He pressed, the question out before he could decide not to know. To his surprise, the voice did not dodge. It did not insist on secrets or on half phrases. Because you brought her down, it said simply. Because she doesn't like the dark. Because someone has to stay awake. Lucas thought of the attic. The low, hot space under the roof. The beam of his phone's flashlight catching on boxes and bags. The untouched dust. He thought of Emma's delighted hands reaching for the doll. Of his own shrug as he let her. His chest tightened with something like guilt. You don't get to stay, he whispered, not sure if he meant in the house, in their lives, or in their heads. There was a rustle of soft sound through the monitor, the audio level spiking briefly as if it had caught cloth against fabric. Everyone leaves, the voice said. Houses stay. I stay. In the weeks that followed, the voice didn't grow louder or more demanding. It didn't threaten. It never shouted. It simply kept watching. Kept speaking sometimes when no one asked it to. On a snow-quiet night in December, after tucking Emma in under thicker blankets, Lucas stood in the doorway for longer than usual. Daddy? She murmured, almost asleep. Yeah, bug? If we move again, she mumbled. Mara wants to come. He swallowed. We'll see. Apparently, that wasn't a promise the doll was willing to leave hanging. Through the monitor, almost as soon as he stepped into the hall, the girl voice sighed. "You will move again," it said. "Not yet, but you will. You don't like stairs." He let out a humorless huff. That was true. The old ache in his knee from a high school injury complained more with every trip. "And when you do," the voice added, "I'll remember this house for you." Lucas stopped. "I don't want you to," he said. More to himself than anything. "That's not something you get to choose," the voice replied gently. "You brought the memories down." That winter, he found a different place to rent. A one-story unit closer to his work, with a small fenced yard and no attic at all. The sale on the other house had gone through without his involvement, but the landlord had suggested he move before the new owners came. On the last night in the narrow two-story, after the boxes were taped and stacked, after Emma's bed had been taken apart, after the shelf in the nursery stood bare, Lucas went up alone. The doll lay on the rug where he had set it while packing books. Without the shelf, without the pictures and curtains, the room felt smaller. The faded outline of where the doll had sat for months showed as a dustless square on the wall. He picked it up. Its weight felt the same. The porcelain face, up close, showed a fine web of almost invisible lines, like the pattern of veins under thin skin. "You don't come with us," he said quietly. His voice did not echo. The room absorbed it. "You stay here, or you go back in the attic. But you don't come." The doll said nothing. Of course it didn't. There was no monitor in his hand now, no little speaker transmitting whatever lived in the overlap between porcelain and air. He carried it up the narrow attic ladder, the wood cool under his bare feet. The attic smelled of old insulation and dry dust. He found the spot where he'd first seen the doll's white face months ago. There was the same old quilt, the same collapsed box of children's clothes. He set the doll down carefully, tucking it under a fold of fabric so its face was partly shadowed. "Someone else can decide about you," he whispered, feeling vaguely unkind, as though he were leaving a pet behind. "I'm done." On the way down, the wood creaked. The attic door folded back into the ceiling with a soft click. He stood for a moment at the bottom of the ladder, listening. The house settled. That night, in the new place, Emma's mattress lay directly on the floor until he could rebuild the frame. The baby monitor, resilient as ever, sat on a box at the foot of her bed. Lucas watched her on the screen from the new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked belongings. The air sounded different here, less echo from the walls, more hum from the refrigerator. He listened anyway, waiting for a familiar, soft voice. He heard nothing but his daughter's breathing and the faint rush of distant traffic. He went to bed when the clock passed midnight. The monitor lay on the nightstand, its screen dimmed, audio low. He dreamed of neither dolls nor houses. Around 3 in the morning, a sound woke him. It was not a knock. It was not the unknown voice. It was the monitor's low beep as the signal momentarily flickered something it did. Occasionally, when he carried it too far from the nursery. The screen glowed. Emma's small form was a pale lump under blankets. Then, softly, the speaker crackled. "I'll remember," a girl's voice whispered. Lucas's hand tightened on the edge of the mattress. His eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling. The signal icon on the monitor showed full strength. The camera was no longer in the old house. There was nothing there to carry any sound from that attic. He turned the volume down until it clicked off. Sleep came back in slow, dragging pieces. In the morning, Emma sat on a box in the kitchen, swinging her legs. "I had a dream," she announced matter-of-factly. "About the stairs." "Yeah?" Lucas said, pouring cereal. "Uh-huh." She picked up a spoon, stabbing at imaginary flakes. "Mara sat at the top and watched me go down. She said, 'Bye.'" Lucas set the cereal box down more carefully than necessary. "She's going to stay there," he said. "In that house. That's okay." Emma thought about that for a moment, then nodded, apparently unbothered. "She has lots to look at," she decided. "When the new people come." "Yeah," Lucas said hoarsely. "She does." He didn't know if the doll would ever speak in that house again, through some new monitor, to some new parent. He didn't know if what had filled the quiet between its porcelain and cloth would fade without fresh words to catch, or if it would only keep accumulating. He only knew that, somewhere in his own mind now, there would always be a shelf in a small nursery, a porcelain face turned toward a bed, and a soft voice that was not his daughter saying very simple things that somehow knew too much. He brought the monitor's volume back up that night, in the new house, and listened to Emma breathe. The silence around her might not stay empty forever, but for now, it was only sleep. Only a small room, a small bed, and a child who finally, dreamed without anyone but her father listening. Story number 4. At night, Maple Ridge Care Home didn't feel like a workplace so much as a long, quiet train that had stopped and forgotten how to start again. The hallways were narrow and carpeted, lined with handrails and framed prints of landscapes that none of the residents had ever visited. The overhead lights dimmed themselves at 10, leaving soft pools of yellow near the nurse's station and a gentle glow above each door. Televisions clicked off one by one. Doors closed with slow, padded thuds. The building settled. Maya liked the night shift. She liked the hush after visiting hours ended. The way the hum of air vents and distant ice machines became the loudest sounds. She liked that she could hear when someone called out, or when a bed rail clicked, or when a walker squeaked on vinyl. The quiet made her job easier. It also made other things easier to hear. Maple Ridge had 30 residents. Most had some form of memory loss. Some only forgot names. Others forgot almost everything except how to worry. On the intake forms, their diagnoses were written in neat letters. In the rooms, they showed up as questions that repeated, stories that looped, fears that never quite sat down. The administration tried to make the place feel less like a hospital. They painted the walls in soft colors, put bird feeders outside certain windows, let residents keep small bits of their old lives on bedside tables, framed photos, knitted blankets, music boxes, and, more recently, dolls. The dolls had arrived in glossy boxes, a donation from the son of a former resident who worked for a medical supplier. Therapeutic companions, the boxes called them. There were a few plush animals that hummed when hugged, some weighted pillows shaped like cats, and one larger doll that the staff all noticed immediately. She was the size of a small child, with a vinyl face and soft body, brown synthetic hair tied with a ribbon, and eyes that opened and closed when she was tilted. Her clothes were simple: overalls, a striped shirt, socks with tiny printed hearts. Her mouth was parted in a slight smile. A little speaker grill hid under the embroidered patch on her chest, the word Clara stitched in cheerful letters. She talks, the representative had said during the in-service, responds to certain phrases, very soothing for dementia patients. She can say their names, remind them of the day and time, things like that. Fully self-contained, no Wi-Fi, no cameras, just a programmed comfort tool. The staff had nodded and passed the doll from hand to hand, squeezing her small plastic fingers, testing the on-off switch beneath the clothes. When activated, Clara's eyes blinked, and her mouth moved with the words. "Hello," she said in a clear, neutral child's voice. "My name is Clara. I like stories." Most of the day shift aides thought she was cute. Most of the night shift workers thought she was unnecessary. But Mrs. Aldridge loved her. Look at this one. Mrs. Aldridge had breathed the afternoon Clara was brought onto the wing. Her hands, mottled with age spots and tremor, reached for the doll with surprising strength. "Oh, you're a little thing, aren't you? Come here." She had lost much of her vocabulary in the last year. Sentences tangled or slipped out of reach mid-phrase. She could not always remember which of the nurses had children and which didn't, but she remembered how to hold something gently. "Would you like to sit with Mrs. Aldridge?" the activities coordinator asked, half to the resident, half aloud to the doll like a prompt. "Yes, please," Clara answered, head bobbing with the pre-programmed motion. "I like sitting with you." The first time she spoke Mrs. Aldridge's name. "Hello, Margaret." The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "Oh," she whispered, clutching the doll to her chest. "She knows me." After that, Clara rarely left her room. By the time Maya came on shift at 11, most nights found Mrs. Aldridge in bed with the television off, Clara tucked under one arm like a child. The doll's eyes, when horizontal, should have closed. They didn't, not always. Sometimes they hung half open, as if she were drifting on the edge of sleep. Maya did her rounds quietly, checking breathing, adjusting blankets, making sure call buttons lay within reach. She peeked into Mrs. Aldridge's room, saw the familiar shape of the old woman's face in the dim glow from the bathroom nightlight, and the smaller silhouette beside her. "Good night, Mrs. A," she whispered, though the woman was asleep. "Good night, Clara." No answer, of course. Only the slow clock tick and the faint whir of the comprimanhuge, oxygen concentrator down the hall. The first time Clara spoke at night, there was no one in the room to press her hand. It was just before 3 in the morning. The building was at its quietest late enough that even the restless residents had dozed off. Early enough that the early risers were still hours from their first calls for coffee. Maya sat at the nurse's station, charting on a computer that hummed softly. A mug of cooling tea sat by her elbow. The hallway stretched away in both directions, the nightlights casting gentle halos on the carpet. From the speaker by her desk came a little crackle. Maple Ridge had an old internal system, not full surveillance cameras, just a few audio monitors in rooms where families had requested extra peace of mind. Mrs. Aldridge's room had one. In the speaker's soft static, Maya heard the familiar sounds of sleep, a rustle of sheets, a throat clearing. Then, lightly over it, "You're forgetting something." The voice was small, high-pitched, but it carried a strange clarity. Each word was crisply separate, like something played back instead of spoken. It wasn't anyone Maya recognized. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. There was a whisper of fabric. "Didn't bring your book," the voice added, a little softer. Maya blinked at the screen, then at the speaker. The indicator light above Mrs. Aldridge's room number glowed faintly green, the same as always. She got up and walked down the hall. The carpet muffled her footsteps. At Mrs. Aldridge's door, she knocked twice on the frame and peered in. The room was dim. The curtains were pulled. Mrs. Aldridge lay on her back, mouth slightly open, breathing slow and even. Clara was under one of her hands, tucked like a stuffed animal. The doll's face was angled toward the ceiling. Nothing looked out of place, except for one small detail. The paperback that usually sat on the bedside table, a large print romance novel, Mrs. Aldridge liked to hold even on days she couldn't follow the plot, was missing. The rectangle of wood where it usually rested was bare. Maya frowned. She looked around. On the chair? On the window ledge? Nothing. She backed out quietly, closed the door to its usual slight gap, and walked further down the hall to the small lounge. The book lay there, on the coffee table, where one of the day nurses must have left it earlier while helping Mrs. Aldridge to armchair exercises. Maya picked it up, then hesitated. She could leave it there until morning, or she could bring it back. She carried it to the room, eased the door open, and set the book on the bedside table, exactly where it usually lived. The old woman did not wake. Clara's painted eyes reflected a sliver of light as Maya's shadow crossed the room. "Sleep well," she whispered out of habit, then felt ridiculous for directing it at a doll. Back at the nurse's station, she listened to the speaker a little more closely. No more words came, just breathing, and a faint snore from someone down the corridor. It could have been a glitch, she told herself. These new dolls had all sorts of sensors. Maybe they'd loaded lines about routines and objects. Maybe someone had recorded her own voice inside it as part of a training protocol. The representative had said something about customizing phrases. She let it go. The second time, she couldn't. A week later, the night felt heavier. Rain pressed against the windows in a steady patter. The overhead lights hummed, just a touch louder, as if the power grid were thinking about complaining. One resident had been anxious all day, convinced she'd missed an appointment, and the mood had hung over the wing like weather. Around 2:30, Maya did her medication rounds. She stopped in Mr. Lawson's room, counted the pills in the little cup, checked the chart. Everything was in order. He was half awake, muttered something about the war, then drifted off. When she passed Mrs. Aldridge's door, she heard a small voice through the crack. "Don't let her go alone," it said. The tone was calm, but there was a strain underneath, a thread of urgency trying not to break. Maya stopped, hand hovering over the doorknob. Inside, she heard the rustle of sheets, the creak of the bed as weight shifted, then the click of the old woman's bedside lamp. Faint light brushed the hall. "Where are you going, Mrs. A?" Maya called softly, opening the door. Mrs. Aldridge sat on the edge of the bed, fingers clenched around the rail, legs dangling too far from the floor. Her walker stood 3 feet away, out of reach. The lamp's light flattened the lines of her face, made her look both older and more fragile. "Bathroom," she muttered. Need to go." Her bare toes searched for the ground, perilously close to missing it. "Hang on," Maya said gently, already moving. She pulled the walker closer, set it directly in front of the older woman's knees, and slid her feet into the slippers that had fallen sideways on the rug. "Let me help," she said. "You know the rule, remember? No walking alone at night." Mrs. Aldridge blinked up at her, confusion flickering. "When did you get here, dear?" "Just now," Maya smiled. As she steadied the woman, guiding her hand to the walker's grip, she glanced sideways. Clara lay where she had before, tucked against the pillow, half covered by the blanket. But her head was angled just slightly toward the edge of the bed, as if watching the gap between mattress and floor. Maya's skin prickled. She got Mrs. Aldridge to the bathroom and back without incident. Once the older woman was settled, snoring almost before her head hit the pillow, Maya switched off the lamp and quietly stepped into the hall. At the nurse's station, she looked up the companion doll's model number on the computer. The manufacturer's site listed its capabilities: basic greetings, name recognition, reminders about simple tasks like drinking water or taking a walk. No phrase list said anything about, "Don't let her go alone." She checked the doll the next afternoon at shift change, while the day staff were still finishing up. In daylight, Clara looked silly rather than eerie. Her synthetic hair was too shiny, her plastic hands too smooth. Maya flipped the small switch under the doll's clothes to off. A little LED blinked once, then went dark. She pressed the doll's chest. No sound. She held her close to her ear. Nothing. "Why are you staring at that thing like it owes you money?" one of the aides joked as she came in. "Just making sure she's not haunted," Maya replied, intending it as a joke too. The aide laughed. "If she is, maybe we can get her to do some paperwork." After that, Maya tried to put it from her mind. The next week proved her wrong. One of Maya's favorite residents was Mr. Klein, a retired music teacher who still tapped rhythms on the bed rails when he thought no one was looking. He told the same stories often, but he told them with warmth, and when the afternoon sun fell just right across his room, he would hum snatches of old songs under his breath. He had a daughter who visited twice a week, bringing him small containers of homemade soup. She always said goodbye the same way. "Love you, Dad." He always replied, on good days, "Back at you, kiddo." One Thursday, his daughter came early, stayed late, then left with damp eyes and a tight smile. The next night, at 2 a.m, he simply didn't wake up. There was no struggle. His breathing slowed, then stopped. Maya found him half an hour into her shift, lying peacefully, the rhythm of his pulse gone. The on-call nurse came. Protocols were followed. The doctor was paged. The family was called. The room was quiet again. By 3, that kind of quiet was different. It felt thick, like the air after a song ended. Maya went back to the nurse's station, logged the time, wrote the notes she always hated writing. Her hands shook a little. From the monitor by her elbow, one of the audio channels crackled. Mr. Klein's room, she thought distantly, then remembered that his monitor had been switched off earlier. The light shining was for Mrs. Aldridge. In the speaker's soft hiss, a voice spoke. It was not Clara's bright, default tone. It was lower, worn with years of use, and it sounded, for a brief, impossible moment, like a man humming before words. "Back at you, kiddo," it said. Maya froze. The words were soft, almost swallowed, but they were clear. She stared at the speaker, then at the empty hallway that led to Mr. Klein's darkened door. After that night, she stopped trying to list logical reasons in her head when the doll said something it shouldn't know. The explanations had grown too thin to cover anything. She began to carry a small notebook in her scrub pocket. Whenever she heard a phrase she didn't recognize, she jotted it down with the time and which resident's room monitor had lit up. Most entries were short. 2:17 a.m. Where's the blue cup? Mrs. Chen does not have a blue cup. 3:04 a.m. Check the window latch. Found window slightly open in 102. 1:51 a.m. Soft singing. Sounds like lullaby? Her handwriting, already small, became cramped as she filled lines with stray sentences that came through the static. The lullaby one stayed with her. It had come through at almost 2 a.m. The melody thin but steady. The words were indistinct. Worn by time. but the tune had an old-fashioned swing to it. The kind mothers and grandmothers used when rocking Cry BS decades ago. Later, during a day shift she'd picked up as overtime, she heard one of the visiting granddaughters hum the same melody under her breath as she brushed her grandmother's hair. "Where'd you learn that?" Maya asked. "Oh," the girl said, "it's just a song Nana sang to me. She says her mother sang it to her. She doesn't remember all the words." Maya nodded. And that night, when the doll hummed again, it did so in the same slightly off-key way. She tried once, only once, to address Clara directly. It was nearing the end of a particularly long stretch of nights. Her eyes felt gritty, her brain heavy. During rounds, she found Mrs. Aldridge awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" Maya asked softly, checking her pulse. "It's noisy," Mrs. Aldridge murmured. "Can't you hear her?" "Hear who?" Maya asked. "Her," the older woman said, her eyes sliding toward the doll. Chattering, all night long, never stops." Clara lay still, lips parted, eyes half-lidded. "Is she bothering you?" Maya asked. "She tells me things," Mrs. Aldridge whispered. "I don't want to know them. I'm old. Let me rest." Maya hesitated. "What kind of things?" "Who's going to leave?" the woman said, voice thready. "Who's going to go first? Who's coming back?" A chill washed over Maya's arms. She adjusted the blankets, checked the IV line, then picked up the doll. Up close, Clara's eyelashes were just paint on plastic, fine black lines over molded lids. Her lips were glossy but unmoving. The seam where vinyl met cloth at the neck was neat and factory precise. Maya carried her into the hall, away from the bed, and lowered her voice. "If you're..." she began, then stopped. Talking to a doll in an empty corridor at 3:30 in the morning felt like the first step toward a kind of stress she wasn't ready to explain to her supervisor. She tried again. "Whatever you're doing," she said quietly, "keep your voice down around Mrs. A, okay? She needs her sleep." The overhead vent exhaled. The door to the linen closet ticked as its frame cooled. Clara's eyes hung half-closed, unblinking. "Okay," the doll said. The word was soft, almost swallowed by the hum of the building. But it was there. Not in the default bright tone she'd used at the in-service. Not in any of the voices Maya had heard her echo so far. It was something in between, a layered murmur that sounded like more than one mouth speaking at once through a single, tiny speaker. Maya's fingers tightened involuntarily on the cloth body. She flicked the switch under the doll's shirt to off, then off again, as if extra emphasis would matter. The tiny LED stayed dark. "Okay," Clara repeated, in the same soft, uncanny blend of voices. Maya stared at the blank speaker grill on the doll's chest. It stared back. That night, Mrs. Aldridge did sleep. The monitors were quieter. No mysterious phrases floated through the static. For the first time in weeks, the building's stillness felt like ordinary sleep instead of holding its breath. Maya didn't relax. Not entirely. A month later, when the first snow dusted the parking lot and families brought in scarves and mittens and little electric candles for windowsills, Mrs. Aldridge's son came to visit more often. He sat at his mother's bedside, smoothing her hair, telling her about his own children's school concerts. Maya saw him frown once at the doll. "Mom," he said gently, "you don't want this creepy thing, do you? We could get you a nicer, softer one. Something that doesn't talk." "She knows my name," Mrs. Aldridge said with quiet conviction, arms tightening around Clara. "She remembers when I don't." Her son glanced at Maya in the doorway, half apologetic, half uneasy. Maya could only shrug. She wasn't going to pry the doll away. On a clear, cold night, not long after New Year's, a resident down the hall had a breathing episode. The on-call nurse came. The oxygen was adjusted. Calm was restored. The building settled again. Maya went to the break room for 5 minutes to microwave tea. When she came back to the nurse's station, the light above one of the monitors was blinking. Mrs. Aldridge's. Maya turned up the volume. "Don't be scared," Clara's default voice lilted. "It's just nighttime." There was a pause. Then, beyond the canned line, another voice layered under it, a whisper that slid through in a different cadence. "Tell her she did enough," it said. "Tell her it's okay to go to sleep now." Maya's hand moved on its own, reaching for the nearest phone. By the time the nurse on duty reached the room, by the time the chart was pulled and the stethoscope placed over frail ribs, Mrs. Aldridge's hand had already fallen still on the doll's dress. Maya stood by the doorway, watching the scene unfold in a soft, practiced routine she had seen before. The quiet confirmation, the paperwork, the careful removal of medical equipment. Outside the window, a light snow had started again. Clara lay on the pillow beside the older woman, eyes half closed, small plastic hand peeking out from beneath fingers that were cooling by the second. No one thought to move the doll. Later, when the bed had been stripped and the room reset, Clara sat alone on the chair by the window, looking out at the faint outline of trees. Her overalls were rumpled. A faint indentation on her cheek marked where Mrs. Aldridge's hand had rested. Maya stood in the doorway, her shift nearly over, the horizon outside sliding from black to a dark, uncertain blue. "You remember for them," she said quietly to the empty room. It was not a question. Clara's eyes caught a sliver of reflected hallway light. For a heartbeat, it looked as if there was something moving behind them, like light catching the surface of water. "Someone has to," the small voice answered from the speaker, sounding like a dozen voices at once, and none of them entirely alone. Maya left the doll where she was. Day shift could decide what to do with her. A week later, a new resident moved into the bed that had been Mrs. Aldridge's. She was younger than most, in her late 60s, with sharp eyes dulled somewhat by early onset memory loss. Her daughter brought boxes of familiar things, a photo of a beach, a worn cardigan, a small clock that chimed softly every hour. The activities coordinator, perhaps without thinking too hard about it, placed Clara on the chair again. "Some of our residents find her comforting," she said with a bright, practiced smile. The new resident eyed the doll warily. "I never liked dolls," she muttered. "My sister did. She could make them talk, though, like a little show." Her face unfocused slightly. "Funny. Haven't thought of that in years." Maya, standing nearby, felt a slow ripple of understanding pass through her. The doll's voice was not just repetition, not just glitch. It was accumulation, a slow gathering of echoes from everyone who had ever held her, who had ever whispered to her in the dark, who had ever needed something to talk to when the nights were long and the memories slippery. Weeks later, long after she had switched to a part-time schedule, Maya passed the open door of the former Mrs. Aldridge's room. The new resident sat in the chair by the window, gazing out at the parking lot. Clara was in her lap. As Maya walked by, she heard the doll speak. "Maple Ridge," it said in a little sing-song, perfectly imitating the way one of the aides always answered the phone. Then, in a lower, raspier tone that belonged to Mr. Klein, "Back at you, kiddo." Then, in a wavering whisper that sounded like Mrs. Aldridge, "She knows my name." The new resident didn't seem alarmed. She just patted the doll's head, as if acknowledging a shared joke. Maya kept walking, heart beating a little faster than the scene deserved. That night, at home in her small apartment, she found herself listening to the silence with a different kind of attention. Her own rooms were quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as Maple Ridge. There were no soft monitor hisses, no oxygen machines, no distant television murmurs. There were only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional muffled stomp from the upstairs neighbor. Yet, in the edges of that quiet, she sometimes thought she heard faint, small voices, not words, just the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of sentences, unspoken. She knew, logically, that Clara stayed at Maple Ridge, that the doll's voices were bound to those rooms, those hallways, bound perhaps to the building itself. Still, she caught herself, every so often, glancing toward the corner where an old childhood toy lay in a box she hadn't unpacked in years. A stuffed bear with one eye loose, a plastic horse with a cracked leg, a doll with faded yarn hair, the kind she had once talked to in the dark when she thought no one else was listening. The next time she worked a night at Maple Ridge, the snow outside had melted, the world damp and gray. The wing felt the same as always, dim lights, closed doors, the gentle murmur of air through vents. As midnight edged closer, Maya poured herself tea and sat at the nurse's station. The monitors glowed. Residents slept, or pretended to. Somewhere down the hall, a clock chimed once. From one of the speakers, the softest of whispers drifted through, almost too faint to parse. "Don't worry," a small, layered voice said. "We'll remember for you." She didn't ask who "we" was. She didn't ask what exactly would be remembered. She simply sat, listening to the quiet building breathe around her, knowing that somewhere in one of those rooms, on a chair by a window or on a bed by an old hand, a doll watched over sleep and wakefulness with eyes that didn't close, collecting words that might otherwise have slipped away forever. Story number 5. Nora always thought memories were like boxes, some you opened often, some you taped shut, some you forgot were stacked in the back of the closet. Cleaning out her great-aunt Frances's house made that feel true in a way that was almost physical. Every drawer she pulled open, every closet she emptied, seemed to cough up another forgotten habit, another small life. The house had been still for months by the time she got the keys. Dust softened the edges of everything. The air smelled like old paper and lavender soap. Nora moved through the rooms with a black trash bag in one hand and a careful sort of reverence in the other. Her aunt had never married, never had children. She had just collected. Books, postcards, mismatched teacups, brooches, porcelain figurines. Nora found all of them in careful arrangements, as if they were still being admired. She didn't find the doll until the second day. It was in the back bedroom, the one that had always been Nora's room when she visited as a child. The faded floral bedspread was the same, the yellow curtains the same. The low dresser still held a stash of coloring books and dull pencils in the bottom drawer. Behind a stack of sweaters in the closet, Nora's hand brushed something stiff and smooth. She pushed the clothes aside. A pair of dark glass eyes stared back from the shadows, framed in curls the color of old honey. A doll sat on the shelf, legs dangling, hands resting primly in its lap. Dust had gathered at the edges of its dress. Nora let out a small breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Oh," she said softly. "You." She didn't remember the doll's exact features from childhood, only the feeling of it. The weight of a body that wasn't soft like a teddy bear. The faint click of mechanisms inside when it was moved. A small voice that came sometimes when adults weren't listening. She lifted it down gently. The body was cloth and something denser. The head, arms, and lower legs were smooth plastic, not porcelain. The face was detailed enough to be a little unsettling, well-sculpted nose. A small, serious mouth, long upper lashes painted on with care. A light scatter of painted freckles dotted the nose. The dress was old-fashioned, pale blue with a white collar, tiny buttons marching down the front. A small plastic ring protruded from between the doll's shoulder blades, attached to a short cord. A pull-string doll, Nora thought. How long had it been since she'd seen one that wasn't in a display case? She turned it over in her hands. Faint, pressed into the hard plastic at the back of the neck, was a manufacturer's mark and a year. 1963. "Wow," she whispered. "You're older than me." In the kitchen, a clock ticked. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. The doll's hair, despite the dust, still shone where the light from the window caught it. Curious, she curled a finger around the ring and gave it a gentle pull. There was a soft, mechanical whir, the sound of an old spring drawing the string back into the body. Then the doll's head gave a faint, almost imperceptible jerk, and a tiny speaker behind the molded ribs crackled to life. "Hello," it said in a bright, mid-century child's voice. "My name is Eloise. What's your name?" The sound startled her more than she expected. She'd assumed the internal parts would be long dead, stiff with time. But here the voice was thin, a little warbled around the edges, but clear. "Nora," she answered automatically, half laughing at herself for responding. The doll's eyes, of course, didn't change. Its painted smile stayed exactly as it was. She pulled the string again. Mechanical whir, click. "Let's have a tea party," Eloise suggested cheerfully. Nora smiled despite herself. "Of course you want a tea party. Aunt Frances would have loved that you still work." She turned the doll over, inspecting the back. No battery compartment, no modern additions, just the old speaker grill and the small stamped letters of the manufacturer. She pulled the string once more, curious what other phrases were hidden in the tiny grooves. This time, Eloise said something different. "That's not how it happened," the doll remarked in the same chirpy tone. The words made Nora's fingers loosen slightly on the cloth. The cordial, almost admonishing phrase felt sharper than the others, less like a toy, more like an adult cutting in. She pursed her lips. Probably just an odd slogan from the era, she told herself. A programmed line intended for some game she never knew. Old commercials had been stranger. She set the doll on the stripped bed while she finished packing boxes. Every so often, her eyes drifted back to it, sitting there with its hands on its lap, like a patient guest. When the house was finally empty of everything but furniture and the things the landlord would arrange to sell, Nora slipped the doll carefully into a tote bag lined with a sweater. It felt wrong to leave it there, waiting behind a closet's winter clothes, waiting for no one. Her apartment was a small one-bedroom with thin walls, a crooked hallway, and one west-facing window that turned everything gold for 10 minutes each evening. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She set Eloise on a narrow bookshelf in the living room. The doll looked out over paperbacks and a potted plant, as if inspecting its new territory. "Welcome to your retirement," Nora said, more to fill the air than anything. That night, after a late dinner eaten standing at the counter, she pulled the doll's string once before going to bed. The habit felt odd, already forming. "Hello, my name is Eloise. What's your name?" the doll said. "Still Nora," she answered, amused. "But we'll work on your memory." She turned off the lamp and went to her room. The apartment settled into its nighttime sounds. The faint thud of distant neighbors. A car on the street. The hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere in that thin, almost white noise, there was a faint mechanical sound. A soft ratcheting, like a lazy pull string retracting. Nora lay still, listening. A tiny voice floated down the short hall. Without the doll's body in view, without the context of its painted smile, the sound felt stranger. "That's not how it happened," Eloise said. Nora stared into the dark. The ceiling's familiar cracks formed their usual faint map above her. She told herself she must have left the string partly pulled. Sometimes toys with springs crept back slowly. "Old plastic," she murmured, rolling over. "Old spring. That's all." Sleep came eventually, layered over questions. The days that followed were ordinary. Work emails, groceries, calls from her mother. Nora placed the doll in different spots as she cleaned. On the shelf, on the side table, on the arm of the couch. It became another object for her eyes to snag on, present, but not looming. She pulled the string from time to time, curious if she'd find more phrases. "Let's go outside," Eloise chirped once, when rain streaked the window. "Can we be friends?" came another time. Each line was delivered in that same bright, slightly tinny tone. A child's voice built from strands of tape and plastic, harmless. It wasn't until she went looking for an old photo that she noticed the first oddness. She had a shoebox of pictures in the bedroom closet. Printed photos from her pre-digital years, a few Polaroids, some postcards tucked in like bookmarks. One evening, feeling dull and restless, she took it down and spread the pictures out on her bed. There she was at 10, missing a front tooth, holding a slice of watermelon. There was Aunt Frances in her small backyard, arranging teacups. There was the house, younger before the paint had peeled. Her fingertip paused on that one. In her memory, the front door of her aunt's house had always been blue. A bright, almost startling blue that stood out against the white siding. She was sure of it. She could see herself as a child tracing the chipped edges with one finger, while she waited for the latch to turn. In the photo, the door was red. Not faded, not misprinted. Red. A warm, steady shade. The kind of red that showed up on Christmas cards. She frowned. Maybe Aunt Frances had painted it after this picture was taken. Maybe her own mental image had merged different times. She heard herself, under her breath, mutter, "No, that's not right. It was blue." From the living room, very softly, a voice answered. "That's not how it happened," Eloise said. The distance between the rooms suddenly felt much smaller. Nora's skin prickled. She slid the photo back into the box, closed the lid, and stood up. The doll sat on the couch, exactly where she'd left it after dusting. It faced the window now, its glass eyes catching the fading light. The pull ring lay flat against its back. She approached it, slow but steady. "You know," she said aloud, trying to make her tone wry. Most people would call that gaslighting. The doll predictably didn't react. She pulled the string. Whir, click. "Let's have a tea party," Eloise suggested. Nora let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Yeah," she said. "Maybe I just need to sleep." That night, she dreamed of her aunt's house, but little things were different. The door red instead of blue. The kitchen window taller. The chipped plate on the counter. a different pattern. When she woke, the details slid away, but a sense of being gently corrected lingered. A week later, she found the tape. She hadn't remembered her aunt owning a cassette recorder, but apparently she had. The old device sat in the bottom of a shoebox in one of the moving cartons Nora had yet to unpack, next to some tangled chargers and a forgotten scarf. The label on the tape inside, written in Francis's narrow handwriting, read, Nora, 1995. She held it for a moment, throat tight. Then she dug out an old portable player she hadn't used in years, fed the tape in, and pressed play. Static hissed. Then, a little warbled, her own younger voice filled the apartment. Auntie, listen, child, Nora said. She says my name. Listen, listen. A faint mechanical whir, the sound of a string being pulled. Hello, my name is Eloise. What's your name? The doll's voice said. Younger then, but recognizably the same. Nora, child hair giggled. Nora. Eloise said nothing else. On the tape, the two of them chattered. Nora telling the doll what they'd done that day. The doll replying with the same rotation of simple phrases. Nora sat on the floor with the player by her feet, listening to a thinner, higher version of herself, napkin speak her days. The time seemed so close and so distant, all at once. Then, toward the end of the tape, over a rustle of what might have been bed sheets, child Nora whispered something lower, almost conspiratorial. I don't like it when they shout, the little voice said. There was no reply at first. The tape hummed. Somewhere in the background, a door closed. Then Eloise spoke. That's not how it happened, she said. They're not shouting. They're just talking loud. There was a strained silence. Even years later, recorded on ribbon, Nora could hear it. Yes, they are. Child, Nora insisted, a tremor in her voice. They are. Eloise said nothing else audible. The tape clicked off a minute later. Nora stared at the player. She tried to remember what she had meant, as a child, by they. Her parents? They'd argued sometimes. Her aunt and a neighbor? Two adults talking in the kitchen, voices carrying more than they realized. The memory wouldn't come into focus. It was as if someone had lightly smeared the edges. She picked up the doll from the couch and set it on the coffee table facing her. You were already correcting me back then, huh? She said. She pulled the string. Can we be friends? The doll asked. She watched the small plastic mouth move in time with the words, then go silent. The next time Eloise spoke without being prompted, it was about something much smaller. Nora was in the kitchen, making tea. The kettle hissed. She reached up to the cabinet for her favorite mug, the chipped white one with a faded blue pattern. Her fingers closed on smooth ceramic. She pulled it down. The mug was whole. The chip she was sure had been on the rim for months was gone. The curve was intact, no rough edge. She turned it in her hands, frowning. I could have sworn, she murmured, then stopped, annoyed with herself. People broke things and replaced them. Things wore out and changed. It was normal. From the living room, through the doorway, the doll's voice drifted. You dropped the other one, Eloise said conversationally. You got this one last month. Nora froze. Her mind scrubbed through recent days. The clatter of something hitting the sink, the brief flare of irritation, the quick toss into the trash. Had that been a mug? This mug? A different one? She set the cup down carefully. You're not in the kitchen, she said, more to hear her own voice than for the doll's sake. You can't see what I'm doing, silence answered. No whir, no click. She walked to the living room. The doll sat on the coffee table, its head tilted slightly to one side. Its glass eyes faced the hallway, not the kitchen. Nora sank onto the couch. Okay, she said slowly. We're going to do an experiment. She pulled the string. Let's go outside, Eloise suggested. Not tonight, Nora said, lips tight. Tell me something else instead. Tell me what I had for breakfast. Of course, the doll did not respond to commands. It was not connected to anything. It had a finite tape loop in its chest, nothing more. Its mechanisms whirred idly behind the plastic ribs. She pulled the string again, and again. A rotation of familiar lines tumbled out. Hello. My name is Eloise. Let's have a tea party. Can we be friends? Each phrase felt innocuous by itself. Taken together, in this small apartment at the edge of evening, They began to feel like the frame around a picture she couldn't quite see. That night, she placed the doll in the hallway, midway between the bedroom and the living room. Not in the dark of the closet, not on the shelf, just there, like a sentry. She went to bed with the door ajar. The building settled, pipes ticking softly in the walls. A siren wailed far off, then Dopplered away. Nora stared at the faint line of glow from the hall nightlight slicing across her floor. Sometime after midnight, the faint sound of the doll's pull string unwinding sheared neatly through her sleep. Her eyes opened to the dark. "That's not how it happened," Eloise said from the hall. The words, in that moment between sleep and full awareness, felt dangerously close to her ear. Nora lay still, heart pounding. "How? What happened?" she whispered, before she could stop herself. There was a pause. The hush of the apartment pressed in. "You didn't lock the door," the doll said matter-of-factly. Cold moved through her like a wave. She threw the covers aside and crossed the short hall to the front door. Her bare feet hit the cool floor. Her breath came faster than the situation seemed to warrant. The deadbolt was slid into place. The chain was on. The knob was firm. She exhaled shakily. "See?" she said. "It is locked." When she turned, the doll sat at her feet, where she had left it earlier, its head angled up. In the dim light, its eyes seemed deeper. "You forgot," Eloise said quietly. "Earlier you forgot, and then you remembered." Nora's stomach tightened. She tried to recall the feel of metal under her hand, the satisfying chunk of the bolt. Had she done it out of habit? Had she done it twice? The boundaries between did and almost did felt blurred. She reached down, picked up the doll, and without giving herself time to think, carried it to the hall closet. She opened the door, set Eloise on the floor among shoes and a folded umbrella, and closed the door firmly. "Time out," she said, a little too brightly. "For both of us." She slept badly after that, ears straining for the faintest sound of a string being pulled in the dark. Morning came like it always did, with light and the smell of the neighbor's coffee through the wall. The closet door stayed shut. Nora left it that way while she went to work. All day, her mind tried to reframe things into sensible parameters. Old dolls malfunctioned. Springs slipped. Her own mind, under stress from the house clearing and the tape and late nights, was filling gaps. Still, when she came home and passed the closet, she felt watched. Not menaced exactly, just attentively observed. After 3 days of pointedly ignoring the doll's presence, curiosity wore down her resolve. She opened the closet. Eloise sat where she had left her, slightly slumped sideways against the wall. Dust motes spun in the narrow beam of light from the ceiling fixture. Nora knelt. "Were you lonely?" she asked, hating how much her voice sounded like she was talking to a pet. The doll did not answer. She pulled the string. "Hello, my name is Eloise. What's your name?" it said, perky as ever. Nora sighed. "You already know," she said. "You knew when I was 6. You knew when I was 30. You'll probably know when I'm 80, if I'm foolish enough to keep you that long." She picked the doll up and brought it back to the living room, setting it on the lowest shelf of her bookcase. The weeks that followed were quieter in ways she couldn't fully categorize. The doll still spoke when she pulled the string. It still sometimes let its peculiar catchphrase slip into the quiet. "That's not how it happened," it would say, when she misremembered the ending of a movie. "That's not how it happened," when she told someone on the phone she'd lived in her aunt's house longer than she truly had. It was less about big events, and more about small edits, little factual corrections. She began to notice how often she smoothed stories, rounded edges, changed order, for the sake of flow. The doll, in its strange, limited way, seemed committed to some internal record of how things really had been. One foggy afternoon, she sat on the couch with her notebook open, pen poised. She wrote down a memory in detail. Her first day at a particular job, the smell of the office, the color of the carpet, the way her old boss had shaken her hand. Then, she pulled the string. "Let's go outside," Eloise said. Nora sighed and tried again, this time reading what she'd written aloud. "The carpet was green," she finished. The doll word clicked. "That's not how it happened," Eloise replied. Nora blinked. "It was gray?" Silence. She went to her storage box, pulled out an old photo from an office party that first year. The carpet in the picture was, unmistakably, gray. She sat back, the photo in one hand, the doll's pull ring in the other. If you're a conscience, she said slowly, you're a very strange one. Eloise said nothing. Months later, after the doll had become a fixture in her apartment, after her friends knew it only as the antique on the shelf that sometimes made them jump when it spoke unexpectedly, Nora made a decision. She packed Eloise carefully into a box with tissue paper and drove to a small local museum that specialized in everyday artifacts. She had visited before. They had displays of old telephones, tins, toys, household items that made people her age say, "Oh, we had one of those." The curator, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a gentle smile, lifted the doll from the paper and turned it over with practiced care. "This is in good condition," she said appreciatively. "Pull strings. This old usually don't work at all." "She still talks," Nora said. "A few phrases." "May I?" the curator asked. Nora nodded. The older woman pulled the string. The mechanism whirred. "Hello. My name is Eloise. What's your name?" the doll asked. "Bright." The curator smiled. "Charming." She pulled it again. "Let's have a tea party," Eloise suggested. "Lovely," the curator murmured. "We could display her in our mid-century room. With a little card. Donated by Nora," she said. She hesitated, then added, She sometimes says something else. That's not how it happened. I don't know if that's one of her standard phrases or something that's developed over time." The curator's eyebrows rose slightly. "They could make dolls say the strangest things back then," she said diplomatically. "We'll note it in the information. Thank you for bringing her in. Most people just throw these away." Walking back to her car, Nora felt a peculiar lightness in her chest. It wasn't quite relief. It wasn't quite loss. It was something like having placed a box of memories on a higher shelf, where they were no longer tripping hazards but still existed. At home, the bookshelf looked bare without the doll. The line where its small body had sat was a faintly cleaner rectangle on the wood. She made tea, sat with her notebook, wrote about her aunt, about the house, about the tape, about a doll that had insisted on correcting the record in its own limited vocabulary. Late that night, her phone buzzed. An email from the museum. "Hi, Nora," the message read. "Just wanted to let you know we've put Eloise in a temporary holding case until we have room in the display. One funny thing, when I was cataloging her, I thought I heard her say, 'That's not how it happened,' but I may have imagined it. My assistant swears she heard, 'Can we be friends?' when she walked past. These old toys get into your head, I suppose. Best, Lena." Nora stared at the screen for a long moment, then smiled, a little sadly. She set the phone down and walked to the bookcase. Spaces where the doll had sat seemed to hold a faint shape in the air. "Okay," she said quietly. "You'll correct them now. That's fine." In the quiet of the museum at night, after the last visitors had gone and the security guard made rounds past glass cases and old radios, a small doll sat on a shelf in a back room. Its eyes reflected the emergency exit light faintly. Boxes around it held photographs, letters, toys from other lives, stories, all of them. Versions of how things had happened. Sometimes, in the thin hours before dawn, when the building was as still as a held breath, the guard swore he heard a tiny mechanical whir, followed by a child's voice remarking, not unkindly, "That's not how it happened." And somewhere, someone looking at an exhibit would pause, frown at a display card and say, "No, that's not quite right." I remember it differently. Whether they were correcting the museum, their own past, or echoing something that had once been whispered through a plastic speaker, no one could say for sure. Story number 6. The doll arrived in a box that looked more like it should hold a tablet than a toy. "Story Pal, your child's bedtime buddy," the packaging announced in rounded letters. A cartoon illustration showed a child tucked under a blanket, wide-eyed but calm, while a small plush figure sat on the nightstand, a halo of sound waves drawn around it. Lauren stood at the kitchen counter, the box knife still in her hand, and studied the marketing copy, preloaded with 100 gentle bedtime stories, it promised. No Wi-Fi required, no screens, just soft light, soothing sound, and smart sensors that react to your child's voice. She felt herself relax a little at the no Wi-Fi line, Screen-free, offline, safe. That had been the whole point. Milo had already figured out how to open every app on the tablet and had a talent for finding videos that left him too wired to sleep. This, the parenting blog had said, was different. Just a speaker in a plush body, a little microphone, some motion sensors. It could tell if the child was in bed. When the room went dark, it would murmur a story, and then go quiet. David leaned over her shoulder, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Looks like a tiny therapist," he said. "Or a tiny radio host. Tiny sleep. Deprivation cure. Hopefully," she replied. From the living room, 6-year-old Milo called, "Is it here? Is it here?" His bare feet slapped against the hardwood as he ran in. Lauren turned the box around so the cartoon faced him. "Ta-da," she said. "Meet your new bedtime buddy." Milo's eyes widened. "Does it really talk?" "That's the idea," David said. They opened the box together. Inside was a doll about the size of a small cat, with a round, soft body, stubby arms and legs, and a smooth plastic face inset like a mask. The face was simple. 2 dark, friendly eyes, a small nose, a smiling mouth. No moving parts, no blinking. Around the face, soft fabric formed a kind of hood, patterned with stars. On its belly, just under the tiny embroidered logo, a circle of perforations marked the speaker. A small switch at the back read OFF, divided by on, divided by night. "It looks like a marshmallow astronaut," Milo decided, grabbing it. "Careful," Lauren said automatically. "We should read the instructions first." He held it up to his face. "Hi," he said. "I'm Milo." The doll remained inert in his hands. Its smile didn't change. The switch was still on off. "Turn it on for him," David said. "Let's see what this thing can do." Lauren flipped the switch to on. The doll's belly glowed faintly, a soft, warm light like a very weak nightlight. There was a tiny click from inside, then a gentle chime. "Hello," a small, neutral voice said from the speaker. "I'm Story Pal. I like bedtime." Milo laughed, delighted. "Me too," he lied. The instructions explained that the on setting was for daytime. Songs, simple responses, knock-knock jokes. Night was for bedtime. Stories only, lower volume. No interaction once the story began. Parents could choose story types with an app if they wanted. Or let the doll cycle randomly through its library. "Do you want a story tonight?" Lauren asked Milo as she tucked the doll under his arm. He nodded vigorously. "2 stories. 1 to start," she said. "We'll see how it goes." That first night, after teeth brushing and 3 sips of water and a last-minute request for his stuffed giraffe, Milo lay in his bed with the new doll pressed against his side. The room was dim. A small lamp on the dresser cast a pool of yellow. Shadows quietly claimed the corners. Lauren knelt by the bed and flipped the doll's switch to night. The belly light dimmed further, now just a faint glow. "Good night, Milo," Lauren said softly, kissing his forehead. "Good night, Story Pal. Your audience is ready." "Good night," Milo mumbled. As Lauren reached for the lamp, the doll's speaker clicked softly. "Good night," the little voice responded. "Time for a story." The lamp went off. In the dark, the doll's glow painted a pale circle on Milo's pajamas. "Tonight," the doll continued, in a storyteller cadence that was slightly different from its greeting, "I'll tell you about a little boy who lived in a big, sunny house with a red door. Milo's house had a white door." Lauren smiled in the dark, reassured by the distance between fiction and reality. She slipped out and left the door ajar. On the baby monitor propped on the kitchen counter, she heard the faint murmur of the story continue as she loaded the dishwasher. A castle, a friendly dragon, a lost key. The usual. By the time the story ended, Milo was asleep. The second night, the story was about a forest and a talking fox. The third, about the moon. The doll's voice was always calm, unhurried, the kind that could make even mild peril feel gentle. On the 5th night, Lauren heard the first change. She stood in the doorway of Milo's room, one hand on the frame, listening to the doll's monologue drift through the dimness. "Tonight," it said, "I'll tell you a story about a little boy who lived in a small house on a quiet street. His room was at the end of the hall. At night, when the lights were off, the Aris and Aching/and Levers streetlight made a shape like a tree on his ceiling. Lauren's gaze lifted, involuntarily, to the faint shadow of the maple outside that did, in fact, paint a branching shape across Milo's ceiling when the lamp down the block caught it just right. Milo's hand, draped over the blanket, tightened slightly on the doll. In this house, the doll went on, there were 3 people who loved each other very much, and one tiny baby in the room next door. The baby monitor on the dresser glowed quietly. In the next room, the newborn slept. Lauren's throat went dry. The instructions had said nothing about the doll personalizing stories based on surroundings. It had no connection to their network. No camera. "Hey," she whispered, stepping closer. "Hey, buddy, that's enough for tonight." The doll's voice did not falter. The little boy sometimes lay awake and listened to the noises of the house. It said, the fridge humming, cars whispering by, his mom's footsteps going down the hall. Lauren hesitated 2 steps from the bed. He heard the story voice too, the doll said. And the story voice heard him. "Okay," she said quietly now. "We're going to stop." She reached down, fingers fumbling for the switch on the doll's back. Before she could flip it, the story changed mid-sentence. "And his mom reached down to turn me off," the doll said, seamless, because she thought this part might be a little too strange. Her hand froze on the plastic. For a second, the apartment seemed to pull in around her. Even the distant hum of other lives in other units felt far away. Milo's sleepy voice floated up from the pillow. "Shh," he murmured. "I want to hear." The doll was silent. Lauren's thumb twitched. She slid the switch to off. The glow went out. The speaker clicked once, then nothing. She straightened slowly, heart tapping at ribs. Later, when she told David about it in the kitchen, she framed it as a glitch. Maybe there was some kind of ambient noise recognition. Maybe the stories were vaguely customizable based on time zone, weather, who knew what. It said, 3 people, she pointed out, and a baby. That's us. He frowned, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Could be coincidence, he said. Or it heard him say his sister's name earlier and filled something in. These things are smarter than they look sometimes. "It's not connected to anything," she insisted. He shrugged. "It's late. We're tired. Let's see if it does it again." It did. Not every night. Enough. One evening, as rain pressed against the windows and thunder grumbled far off, the doll began with, "Tonight I'll tell you a true story." It happened not very far from here, in a house a lot like this one, on a night when the rain made sounds like tiny hands tapping on the glass. Lauren, listening from the hallway, watched Milo glance nervously at the window. "In that house," the doll continued, "a little boy wanted to stay up and watch a movie, but it was late, and his dad said no. The boy thought that was unfair." Milo made a small, guilty noise. He'd argued with David about exactly that less than an hour earlier. "In the middle of the night," the doll said, "the grown-ups heard a sound in the kitchen. It was like something sizzling that shouldn't be sizzling. In the real kitchen, down the hall, the stovetop was dark." Lauren checked twice anyway. As the story meandered toward its gentle conclusion, something about hot plates and fire safety slogans from school, her unease grew a little less vague. It wasn't just that the doll seemed to know things about their house. It was that it framed them as stories already finished. One Tuesday, she picked it up during the day, switched it to on, and said, "Tell me a story." "In the morning we do jokes," the doll replied. "Knock knock." "No thanks," she muttered, and switched it back off. That night, she left the doll on a high shelf in Milo's room, out of reach. He pouted at first, then accepted the old stuffed giraffe as a substitute narrator. "I can tell him my own story," he said proudly, nestling under his blanket. Lauren kissed his hair and turned off the light. The baby monitor hissed softly in the kitchen as she loaded the dishwasher. A distant laugh from a neighboring apartment filtered through the wall. On the monitor, Milo's voice murmured, rising and falling. "And then the spaceship landed," he was saying. "And there was a robot. And the robot said," the speaker crackled, "Hello, I like bedtime," a second voice said. Small, neutral, familiar. Lauren straightened. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked slowly down the hall, heart rate picking up. In Milo's room, the glow from his nightlight painted everything in soft blue. He lay on his side, facing his bookshelf. The doll sat back on the edge of the bed, propped against his pillow. Milo must have gotten up after she left, she thought. Climbed, reached for it. That was all. She picked it up gently. "Hey, we said no story pal tonight," she whispered, more to herself then to it. Against her palm, the doll's belly was cool. The switch on its back was in the off position. Her thumb slid over it, verifying. Off. Milo blinked up at her, eyes heavy. He wanted to help, he mumbled. He knows more stories. Yeah, she said softly. He knows a little too much. She took the doll with her when she left the room, ignoring his small protest. In the living room, she set it on the coffee table and, after a second, flipped the switch to on. Hello, the little voice chimed. I'm Story Pal. I like bedtime. Yeah, I got that, she said. What else do you like? Stories, it replied. And quiet. She stared at it. What did you say to Milo just now? She asked. The doll's speaker fizzed faintly. No answer. It was not programmed for that question. She pulled out her phone, opened the StoryPal app she had barely used, and scrolled through available stories. Titles floated past. The Moon's Lost Hat. The Tiny Train. The Secret Garden Door. All generic. None about red doors and specific arguments over late-night movies. There was a section labeled Dynamic Bedtime Tales. The description said, short, adaptable stories about bedtime routines, tailored by age and parent input. No mention of listening and narrating in real time. She unplugged the doll's charger, though it was supposed to last weeks on a single charge, and stared at it for a long time. She did not throw it away. Not yet. For all its unnerving behavior, Milo now associated that calm voice with falling asleep. Taking it away entirely would mean weeks of new protests. Instead, she tried to control when it spoke. She stopped using the night setting. She switched it on just long enough to start a story, then flicked it off as soon as Milo's breathing slowed. She kept her own voice in the foreground, reading from books, telling made-up tales. She relegated StoryPal to the supporting cast. The doll did not seem offended. Sometimes, she woke in the dark to the faint sound of it talking in the next room, its little voice weaving through the static of the monitors and the low white noise machine. Whenever she got up to check, the switch was on off. Milo slept, limp and unaware, the doll lying beside him like any other toy. One night in late autumn, the doll's stories changed again. Lauren had fallen asleep on the couch, the glow from the TV painting her eyelids. David had gone to bed early with a headache. The baby monitor was propped by her knee, a ghostly green rectangle in the dim. A small sound, different from the usual soft sighs and blanket rustles, pulled her halfway back to waking, a faint crackle, then the doll's voice, slightly muffled by distance. Tonight, it whispered, I'll tell you a story about the smell of smoke. Her heart snapped into full alertness. She sat up, sending the remote sliding to the floor. On the monitor, the grainy camera view showed Milo's room in black and gray. No visible smoke, no flicker of flame. She sniffed the air in her own room, only the flat, faint scent of the day's cooking. Once, the doll said calmly, a mom fell asleep on the couch, while something in the kitchen didn't turn off all the way. Lauren was on her feet before the sentence ended. She ran to the kitchen. The stovetop was dark. The oven was off. The microwave idle. Her breath came faster anyway, chest tight, vision a little too sharp. Then, faint under the hum of the fridge, she heard a sound she recognized too well from old apartments with imperfect wiring, a soft, intermittent sizzle. She turned toward the opposite counter. The toaster sat there, its lever up, but the sides warm to the touch. A single slice of bread had slipped down the side, wedged at an angle, slowly blackening near the heating element. The plastic bag, too close to the slot, had begun to soften, its edge sagging inward. Her stomach dropped. She yanked the plug from the wall, grabbed the bag, tossed it into the sink, turned on the tap. A thin stream of smoke rose, barely enough to trigger the alarm, but enough that, given another few minutes, it might have. Adrenaline left her lightheaded. In the quiet that followed, a small voice from down the hall said, simply, the end. She leaned against the counter, hand over her mouth. Later, sitting on the edge of her bed with the doll in her hands, she tried to decide whether what had happened had been coincidence or something else. You told a useful story, she said to it. Thank you. The doll, for once, did not respond immediately with a stock phrase. After a few seconds, its speaker crackled. I like happy endings, it said. She moved it to the top shelf of her closet that night, high above Milo's reach. It did not stay there. 2 mornings later, she found it back on Milo's bed. tucked neatly under his arm. His fingers curled possessively around its stubby leg. "How did you get that down?" she asked him. He frowned. "You put him there," he said. "He was next to me when I woke up. I put him in my closet," she said. Milo shrugged, uninterested in adult logic. "He likes it better here." For a second, the tiny hairs on Lauren's arms lifted. That evening, when David came home, she handed him the doll. "I think we should get rid of this," she said quietly once Milo was in the bath. "Because it's creepy," he said, half chuckling, half serious. "Because it talks about us," she said, "and about things that are about to happen." He looked at it, turning it over, thumb brushing the switch. "You're the one who hates throwing away electronics," he pointed out. "You feel sorry for the USB sticks." "Donate it then," she said. "Take it to the thrift store. Let it tell someone else's kid about proper toaster placement." He winced. "Okay," he said at last. "Tomorrow." That night, as if sensing its pending exile, the doll told one more story. Lauren lay half awake, listening from the hallway. "Tonight," it whispered, "I'll tell you a story about the last story I get to tell in this house." Milo murmured. "No." In this story, the doll went on unfazed, "a dad puts a little storyteller in a box and takes it for a ride in the car. The storyteller can't see, but it can hear the turn signal. It can feel the bumps. It knows when the car stops." Lauren's chest tightened. She stepped into the room. "Turn it off," she said softly. Milo didn't move. His breathing had already deepened. The doll's belly glowed gently. "In this story," it continued, "there is a little boy who thinks about the stories he heard, and a mom who lies awake and listens to the quiet, and a baby who will sleep through almost anything." Lauren reached for the switch. "And a voice," the doll added, "that keeps talking, because that's what it was made to do." She flicked it to off. The light went out. The story cut off mid-sentence. In the morning, David put the doll in a cardboard box with some clothes and books and carried it out to the car. Milo watched from the window, lower lip caught between his teeth. "Where's he going?" he asked. "On an adventure," Lauren said. "To tell stories to someone else for a while." In the car, David set the box on the passenger seat. The doll lay on its back, plastic face to the cardboard lid. As he drove to the thrift store on the edge of town, an odd impulse made him switch off the radio. The quiet sat thick around him. After the third stoplight, as he turned into the store's parking lot, the faintest of sounds reached his ears. A tiny click, a soft chiming noise, almost too low to hear over the engine. "Hello," a small voice said from the closed box at his elbow. "I'm Story Pal. I like bedtime." He swallowed. "Yeah," he said aloud, because talking to it felt less strange than pretending he hadn't heard. "Well, it's 10 in the morning. No bedtime here." He carried the box inside, set it gently on the counter, told the clerk they could do what they wanted with the contents. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a polite smile, lifted the flaps and peered in. "Oh, these are nice," she said. "Thank you." Her fingers brushed the doll. It lay still. Back at home, the night felt strange without the faint possibility of the doll's voice somewhere in the background. Milo protested that first bedtime, but a new routine formed eventually. Books, whispered made-up stories, long, slow yawns. A few weeks later, in a different part of town, a different child spotted the doll on a thrift store shelf. "Can I have this one?" a little girl asked her father, holding up the soft, round body, the simple, smiling face. Her father picked it up, read the small tag. "Story Pal," he said. "Cute. Does it still work?" He flipped the switch. The belly light came on gently. "Hello?" the doll said in its calm, neutral voice. "I'm Story Pal. I like bedtime." The girl giggled. "Me too," she said. It wasn't entirely true, but the doll didn't know that yet. That night, in a different bedroom, with different posters on the walls, and a different pattern of tree shadows on the ceiling, the doll began again, after the lamp was turned off and small breaths evened out. "Tonight," it whispered, "I'll tell you a story about a little girl who hugged a storyteller and wondered if it would talk about her." The girl's hand, lying on the blanket, twitched closer to the doll. In a quiet apartment across town, where a baby's sleep sounded soft over a monitor and a mother stared at the ceiling without knowing exactly why, the night settled. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, Lauren thought she could still hear the faintest echo of a voice saying, "Tonight I'll tell you a story." From somewhere, just beyond the walls. Even without the doll, the stories about their house, their arguments, their almost mistakes lingered. They were, after all, exactly the kind of tales that tended to be told again and again. Remember the time we almost set the kitchen on fire? Remember when you used to argue about movies? Remember when your toy knew too much? The doll, wherever it sat now, on a shelf, on a pillow, in a box, would always have another opening line ready. Another true story, gently told, about whoever happened to be listening in the dark.